Chapter 1057. When Yuan Jianqing and the others entered the Heavenly Sand Cave, Altar Master Lan Yanchu was sitting on a high platform on a remote altar in the southeast corner of Pingdu sect. He asked the cultivator standing below, "Did you find out what happened?" The cultivator replied, reporting to Altar Master, "We've already investigated. The person occupying the Heavenly Sand Cave is inextricably linked to the heavenly demon's devilish sense. This time, we've gathered quite a number of cultivators to offer their souls to the heavenly demon." Lan Yanchu snorted and said, "How can we allow devils to do whatever they want in our Pingdu sect? Who are the cultivators this time? Are there any disciples from our sect?" The cultivator bowed and said, "Other than Yu Boeng, they are all disciples from small sects under my sect. Only one of them looks unfamiliar, but looking at his escape technique, he should be from Xianmen." Lan Yanchu sneered and said, "These devils are so arrogant. Do they really think that there is no one in Pingdu sect?" When the Devil Sense clone made its first move, as the altar master of this area, he had already sensed it. However, most of the people who were killed were itinerant cultivators, and the situation was unclear, so he did not make a move. Now that the ones who were deceived were disciples from lower sects, he had no choice but to go and rescue them. The cultivator said, "I don't know what I should do. Altar Master, please tell me." Lan Yanchu thought for a moment and said, "Your senior brother is already waiting there. You can send a message and let him go and rescue them first. If he can capture those 2 female cultivators, that would be the best. If they escape, don't chase after them. I will take care of the follow-up matters." The cultivator bowed and accepted the order. Not long after, a letter flew out of the altar. After flying for thousands of miles, it finally landed in the hands of a tall and skinny Taoist who was hiding near the Heavenly Sand Cave. After he read the letter, he made a hand seal. Immediately, a tall phantom appeared on his body. Then, he stomped his feet and flew into the sky. In less than 10 breaths, he arrived in front of the cave door. He sensed carefully and felt that there was a flow of spiritual vigor inside. It was obvious that someone was using magic power, so he walked along the cave passage. After traveling 3 or 4 li in one breath, he suddenly turned into a vast cave hall. There were 2 female cultivators standing on the opposite cliff. They had summoned 2 balls of sparkling air that were spinning in the air. Every time they landed on a person's head, a child's giggle would come from the ball of air and the person would immediately fall unconscious. In just a few breaths of time, a large group of people had fallen to the ground. Someone sensed that the situation was not good. He turned around and wanted to escape, but when he reached the entrance of the cave hall, he ran into a layer of restriction and was easily defeated by the ball of air that chased after him. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, only a few people still had the strength to fight. However, most of them looked panic-stricken, and it seemed like they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. There was only a black-robed young Taoist who looked abnormally calm. Every time that ball of air came over, they were all deflected by the flying shuttle, unable to get close to him at all. The 2 female cultivators saw that he was difficult to deal with. However, he didn't take him down first. Instead, he turned to attack the others. Clearly, he was preparing to deal with this person in the end. The tall and skinny Taoist thought about it and didn't rush to save them. Instead, he coldly observed the surroundings. He noticed that there were a few formation flags at the edge of the cliff. There was also a deep and bottomless cave behind him. He deduced that it was the escape route that the 2 women left for him. He was prepared to turn around and escape if things went wrong. After looking at it, he felt that there was a restriction blocking him. If he attacked now, he would definitely scare the 2 women away. It would be better to wait for them to take care of everyone here. When they relax, he would then rush out. At that time, he would use the talisman in his hand to capture the 2 of them. Very quickly, only the young Taoist was left. However, he was very tough. Even though the ball of air was spinning very quickly, it still couldn't take him down. The tall and skinny Taoist couldn't help but feel surprised. However, he still didn't think that this person would win. Hence, he insisted on going out and didn't have the intention to help. When the 2 female cultivators saw that they couldn't win after fighting for a long time, one of them said, "This Taoist, why are you struggling so hard? The two of us have already sealed off this cave. There's no one outside to save you. Don't think about escaping. If you obediently surrender, you might be spared some suffering. However, no matter what she said, the young Taoist didn't care. Even his expression didn't change. At this moment, the tall and skinny Taoist was also a little impressed. Anyone who was in such a dangerous situation, even if they didn't feel pessimistic and hopeless, it would be hard for them to calm down. Putting himself in their shoes, he was in such a situation, but he couldn't remain calm. The two female cultivators gradually grew impatient when they saw their shouts were unable to shake Chen Shi's will in the slightest. One of them waved her hand to remove the restrictions before her, and then with a wave of her palm, a strand of dark green profound light enveloped down. The young Taoist swayed his body slightly, and a ray of light rose behind him, blocking the incoming light wave. At the same time, he pointed his finger, and two dark shuttles flew out, turning into light rays, and attacked the two women. The two female cultivators didn't care at all. They made a hand seal at the same time, and two demons appeared behind them, blocking in front of them. However, at this moment, one of the divine shuttles suddenly jumped from the right to the left. Taking advantage of the fact that the demon was entangled by the other divine shuttles, it shot towards the woman who was protecting behind it. This change was extremely sudden and just happened to cut into the moment when the two women's chi dynamic changed. No one in the field could react in time. It could be said to be a stroke of genius. Even the tall and skinny Taoist who was watching the battle didn't expect it. He heard a scream and saw that the woman had lost one of her arms. Her face showed pain and she shouted, "Senior sister, save me." It was the first time the other woman had encountered such a situation. She was also a little flustered. She actually didn't have the heart to care about the debt. She shook a mysterious light and swept the two of them away. With a flash of light, they escaped into the cave behind them. The tall and skinny Taoist didn't expect the two women to leave just like that. He couldn't help but be startled. He didn't care about hiding behind them anymore. He bit the tip of his finger and used his blood to draw a talisman on his palm. Then, he slapped the restriction light in front of him and instantly broke it. He strode into the cave and chased after them in a mysterious light. After a moment, he turned back, but there was a trace of annoyance on his face. He looked up and saw that the young Taoist was trying to save the people on the ground. He stopped him and said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait. These people have been infected by the demonic poison and their souls are bewitched. With our methods, even if we wake them up, we might not be able to see their original appearance. We need to go to the nearest spirit cleansing altar and ask the altar master to cast a spell so that we won't leave any future troubles." The young Taoist stood up and said, "I see. Thank you for your guidance, fellow Taoist." The tall and skinny Taoist returned the greeting and said with a smile, "I'm Wei Pufang. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" The young Taoist said, "I'm Yuan Jinking." Wei Pufang said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yuan, why don't you come with me to save these Taoists and send them to the altar?" Although Yuan Jinking didn't obtain the clear stone milk this time, he didn't care about it. Saving lives was obviously more important, so he said in a deep voice, "I have the same intention. I'll go with you, fellow Taoist." After discussing and coming to an agreement, the two of them used their mysterious light to sweep everyone on the scene and left the pit. After flying north for more than 2 hours, Wei Pufang pointed downwards and said, "It's here." After saying that, she took the lead and landed. Yuan Jinking saw the altar that was built on top of the mound. From above, it looked like a round hat, so he also landed. There were people on duty on the altar. They recognized that it was a fellow disciple and immediately opened up a restriction. They let the two of them in. When the two of them landed, a blue-clothed cultivator quickly walked up and bowed, "Senior Marshal Brother Wei, Master Lan is waiting for you." Wei Pufang apologized to Yuan Jinking and put down all the cultivators who were swept up by the mysterious light. Then, she hurriedly went to the top of the altar. The blue-clothed cultivator looked at Yuan Jinking and saw that he had an awe-inspiring expression and a clean and upright aura. He felt that his background wasn't ordinary, so he came up to greet him politely. He also asked about his background from the side. However, before the two of them could say a few words, a boy came over and bowed to Yuan Janking. Is it Taoist Yuan? Master Lan invites you. The blue-clothed cultivator chuckled. Master Lan loves to guide the younger generation. Fellow Taoist, go quickly, you might even get some benefits. After Yuan Janking said goodbye, the boy went to the top of the altar. When he reached the top, he saw a long-bearded Taoist standing straight in front of him and Wei Pufang standing behind him. He guessed that this was the Master Lan that the cultivators here talked about. He went forward and bowed, saying, Junior Yuan Janking greets Master Lan. Lan Yanchu looked at him and said with a kind expression, no need to be so courteous. I heard from Marshal Nephew Wei that just now, it was you who defeated those two demonic cultivators? Yuan Janking said, it was just luck. Lan Yanchu smiled. There are many sects in Donghua continent that use flying shuttles as their offensive instruments. However, from what I know, there are only a few sects that are able to receive superior teachings. Just now, when I saw your mysterious light external qi, it was very similar to the sensory nerve of Qinsong school. Are you from this sect? Yuan Janking knew that Pingdu sect and Qinsong school had a close relationship, so he didn't deny it. He said, Junior was lucky. I was taught the sensory nerve by my teacher. It's just that my cultivation is still shallow. Please forgive me. Lan Yanchu saw that he was indeed from Qinsong school and became even more polite. He said, Taoist Yuan, are you going to the Sandy Sky Grotto to find the clear stone milk? Yuan Janking said, yes, Junior has already cultivated to the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. This time, I'm traveling outside to find external medicine to condense my core. I heard that the Sandy Sky Grotto has this item, so I came here to look for it. Lan Yanchu smiled and said, that's right. This is the rule of the master and disciple branch in your sect. He said to the boy beside him, go get a bottle of good quality clear stone milk. The boy accepted the order and left. After a while, he came back with a big jade bottle that was half his body tall. Lan Yanchu said, there used to be a lot of good clear stone milk in the Sandy Sky Grotto, but since there were demonic sect disciples staying there, they were contaminated. This time, Taoist friends saved many cultivators from my lower sect, so I'll give you a bottle of high-quality clear stone milk to thank you. I hope Taoist friend will accept it. Yuan Janking thought about it. Even though he didn't want to thank him, since it was a gift from Yuanying's spiritual master and it was something his sect needed, there was no need to reject it. He waved his sleeve and put the jade bottle into his sleeve. He said, then it would be impolite for Junior to refuse. Lan Yanchu saw that he was so straightforward and was satisfied. He said, that year, even though the original body of the sky demon was killed by spiritual master Hua of your Qinsong school, there were still many demonic clones. If you hurt a demonic cultivator, I'm afraid it will come back for revenge. If you still need to go out, you have to be careful. Yuan Janking heard that there seemed to be a lot of demons here. He raised his eyebrows and asked, does your sect allow these demons to exist in your territory? Lan Yanchu sighed and said, I have the heart, but I can't. There were many deep ravines and valleys around Pingdu cult and countless underground caves. There were some small demonic caves hidden deep under the ground. Until now, no one knew about them. As early as after the sky demon appeared, the cultivators in the cult discovered that there were demonic clones coming here. There were even cases of disciples being infected with demonic poison. However, if this matter was really dealt with, it might not be useful. On the contrary, it would cause panic. Fortunately, the disciples who received the spiritual sustenance of Dharma could go to the hidden appearance pagoda to cultivate every few years. No demonic aura could be stored here. As for those branch sects, even if they were occupied by demonic thoughts, it wouldn't hurt Pingdu cult's foundation. Therefore, they had been entangled until now. Lan Yanchu didn't seem to want to talk about this matter anymore. He changed the topic and said, there's a cleansing spirit cave in the outskirts of my spell altar. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, you can condense your core at my place. Coincidentally, I'm going to follow my master to Qinsong school. If you're interested, you can come with me. Yuan Janking felt that this perfected one was too polite to his sect. He couldn't figure out his intentions and didn't dare to accept his good intentions. he cautiously said, "Let me consider it." Lan Yanchu smiled and said, "Someone, bring fellow Taoist Yuan down and entertain him well." Immediately, a boy came up and made a "please" gesture. Yuan Zhangqing bowed with a Dao salute and followed the boy down the spell altar. Wei Pufang looked at his back and asked curiously, "Uncle Master seems to be taking special care of this fellow Taoist Yuan?" Lan Yanchu smiled and said, "From what you said, this person only relied on a pair of ordinary flying shuttles to defeat those two demonic cultivators. Moreover, he used simplicity to defeat complexity, and his timing was perfect. This can only be done by someone who has cultivated the second half of the soul-sensing scripture. Then this person's identity is not simple. Since that's the case, why don't I do him a small favor now? When he goes to Qinsong school in the future, I might be able to repay him even more. If my guess is wrong, it's not a big deal. With this person's aptitude, he will definitely become someone in the future." Wei Pufang suddenly understood and flattered, "Uncle Master is brilliant." Li Mountain Sect, Yangsha Palace. Zhenren Yuling stood in front of the jade lantern stem and looked at the rolling mountains and lakes below. Her eyes were calm and tranquil, but the aura on her body was ethereal and clear, as though it could disappear with the wind at any time. There were still more than 10 days before she would ascend to another realm. This world would soon have nothing to do with her, but until now, she was still worried about the disciples in her sect. According to her plan, she wanted to facilitate the marriage between the disciples in her sect and the two sects, Qinsong and Yuxiao. In addition to the conditions she mentioned earlier, even if she couldn't achieve her original expectations, it would be enough for the Li Mountain sect to safely survive the Great Calamity. But what made her most regretful was that, looking at the situation in front of her, before her sect ascended, she couldn't see any disciple who had a chance of becoming a grotto heaven. Footsteps sounded behind her, and a servant girl said softly, "Sect leader Zhenren, Lady Shen is here." Zhenren Yuling grunted and turned around. She sat in front of the long table and said, "Call her in." After a while, a valiant female cultivator with bright eyes walked in and kowtowed. "Disciple Shen Zixin congratulates Master for coming out of seclusion." Zhenren Yuling smiled and said, "Disciple, rise." Shen Zixin acknowledged and straightened her body. Zhenren Yuling looked at her up and down and said, "Zixin, after I leave, you will be the second sect leader of the Li Mountain sect. Do you know what you should do?" Shen Zixin was the eldest disciple in the sect. Since she entered the third Yuanning, she had been taking care of the secular affairs in the sect. She was familiar with the internal and external affairs. But hearing Zhenren Yuling ask this, she thought deeply for a while and said, "Be impartial and stand upright." Zhenren Yuling smiled faintly and said, "If you have the cultivation you have now, that will do. But if you are fated to become a grotto heaven in the future, I will give you the 8 words. Qinsong can be attached, Yuxiao can't be approached." Chapter 1058. After 2 days, Yuan Zhangqing decided to reject perfected Master Lan's good intentions and not stay at Pingdu sect to refine his pill. Hence, he personally went to the altar to bid farewell. Lan Yanchu saw that he declined but was not unhappy at all. Instead, he gave him an artifact and told him to be careful of the devil and not let it touch him. After Yuan Zhangqing thanked him, he went to the bottom of the altar. The cultivators who went with him to the heavenly sand cave were helped by the altar and woke up one by one. When they heard that Yuan Zhangqing saved them, they all came up to thank him. Yuan Zhangqing thought for a while and took out the bright stone milk. He only took one portion for himself and gave the rest to everyone. Immediately, he received a round of praises and said that if he needed it in the future, he only needed to send a letter and he would be able to get it. Yuan Zhangqing had no intention of staying for long. After saying goodbye to everyone, he rode on the mysterious light and flew into the distance. Lan Yanchu looked at the moving light and smiled. No matter what, he had already done him a favor. From his perspective, as long as this person's luck was not bad, he would definitely become something in the future. When the time came, he would be useful. When the light disappeared, he turned around and went back to the altar to meditate. When it was almost noon, a disciple came over and said, "Master, There's a letter from the sect saying that perfected master will be leaving in 2 days. Altar master, please go to the sect to receive the order. Lan Yanchu said in a deep voice, I understand. I don't know when I will be back. After I leave, you must guard this altar well. Don't let a devil in. The disciples solemnly agreed. After Lan Yanchu made some preparations, he flicked his sleeves and rode the wind. About 2 hours later, he returned to the white cloud platform at the entrance of Pingdu sect. There were deacons standing on the high altars at the 4 corners of the platform. They held a jade tablet in their hands. While holding a book, they said, Qingfu altar, Lan Yanchu has arrived. Pingdu sect's current sect leader did not have many disciples. Because his seniority was quite high, his lifespan was close to 3,000 years. Early on, he had decided that after he reincarnated, he would pass the sect leader position to either Zhao or Wu. Most of them were disciples of these 2 Taoist masters. Lan Yanchu was a disciple of Wu Wei. When he arrived, he wanted to immediately pay his respects to his teacher. However, he met a few of his peers who were on good terms with him. Just now, he knew that the reason why he brought his disciples to visit Qinsong was because the cultivators from Huanjin, Pingdu, and Qinsong school wanted to have a sword duel and discuss techniques. If they could win face for their respective sects, they would not be able to do so. He would be bestowed with the spirit-strengthening mantra. When he heard this, he couldn't help but feel moved. If the Dharma spirits of the Pingdu sect disciples wanted to increase their power, they would have to cultivate diligently and slowly accumulate their skills. Secondly, they would have to rely on the mantra to refine their spiritual spirit. It was just that this kind of incantation had always been known only by the direct descendants of the sect. If an ordinary disciple were to obtain it, not to say that their cultivation would greatly increase, but it would not be difficult for their magical power to be a notch higher than their peers. He couldn't help but make up his mind. This time, he had to try to win 1 or 2 rounds. Soon it was the second day. Before Wu Wei left, he said to Jinren Zhao, This time we are going to Qinsong. The sect is empty. I will have to trouble Jinren Zhao to take care of it. Jinren Zhao knew what he was talking about and said, Jinren Wu, don't worry and go, I will be here. I won't let the devil be presumptuous. Wu Wei bowed and after saying goodbye, he got on the carriage and flew towards the sky. The disciples under him also rode on their Dharma artifacts. Following closely behind, more than 100 cultivators and thousands of servants headed straight for Lei Tsong sect in a formidable array. The Grotto Heaven people went out, the wind blew and the clouds moved, the clear air filled the sky. The Jinren of the various sects saw the light coming from the southwest and heading towards the north. It wasn't difficult to guess that there were Grotto Heaven cultivators from Pingdu sect heading towards Qinsong school. However, not long after this light passed, a long rainbow shot out from Huanjin Temple. The multicolored light filled the sky, shining for a long time, but it was heading in the same direction as the former. After the Jinren paid attention for a while, they all had their own thoughts. However, the calamity was coming. As long as they could see the situation clearly, they didn't dare to slack off. After paying attention for a while, they collected their thoughts and started to cultivate again. Because of Wu Wei's spell, it only took a day for the Pingdu sect to reach the great pool of Dragon Lake. Almost at the same time, Jinren Pang from Huanjin Temple led a group of people. The 2 Zenrens greeted each other politely in front of the great pool of Dragon Lake. Not long after, a Taoist steward came out from the Qinsong sect to welcome them and said, Jinren Zhang is already waiting in the sect, please come with us. Wu Wei and Pang Yunxiang both informed their disciples to stay at the guest house. Then, they rode the wind and followed the deacon Taoist towards the direction of the clear air in the sky. There was a floating island. Looking from afar, one could see that there were countless temples and golden platforms. Zhang Yan was wearing a black robe. He stood in the sky above the floating island. His body was covered in clear light, and his qi shot up to the sky. Behind him was a wave of light. It was 100 feet high, floating like a waterfall. It was not difficult to recognize that it was the door of a small world. When he saw the 2 of them coming, he bowed and said, Greetings, Jinren. We don't dare to. Wu Wei and Pang hurriedly got off the carriage and returned the greeting. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Both of you, Please follow I into the small world to talk. Wu Wei and Pang both said yes and followed Zhang Yan into the small world. Although the scenery here was good, the two of them had cultivated the grotto heaven for a long time, and each had their own worries, so naturally they didn't care too much. Soon, the three of them arrived at a hut by the sea. Under the sound of waves hitting the shore, they exchanged some pleasantries and sat on the cattail hassock. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Today, I invited the two of you here is to deal with the future disaster." When Wu Wei and Pang heard this, their expressions changed, and they looked over at the same time. In reality, they wanted to know how Qinsong School would deal with the disaster, but since he didn't mention it, they didn't want to ask. However, when he said this, Zhang Yan changed the topic and said, "In a few days, it will be the ascension ceremony of Lishan sect's Jinren Yuling. After this Jinren leaves, the world's situation will be clear. Nanhua and Tai Hao have already attached themselves to Yu Xiao, Yuan Yang is guarding alone, and we, Qinsong, want to go through this with the sects behind the two of you." Jinren Pang pondered for a moment and asked, "What is your sect's intention?" Zhang Yan gently shook his sleeves and said, "For more than 10,000 years, because of our generation's occupation of spiritual opportunity, the world's clear qi has gradually thinned, and the spiritual points in the continents have become unstable. If we look at the future, it has the tendency to spread to the 9 continents, and we, Qinsong, Yu Xiao, and Shaoqing, have already predicted this situation thousands of years ago, so since then we have planned it. However, Yu Xiao's intention is not in line with us, Qinsong. Today, the disaster has come. It is inevitable that we will have to fight." Although they had already expected it, when they heard him say it, their hearts couldn't help but be shocked. Yu Xiao and Qinsong were both one of the 3 great Xianmen, and there were 9 Jinren Grotto Heaven in Yu Xiao sect, and Qinsong was even more powerful, achieving such a realm. Now, there were as many as 13 people. If these two clashed, it would definitely turn the world upside down, and no one could stop it. The two of them couldn't help but fall silent. In fact, if they thought about it carefully, the world's spiritual opportunity could only be peaceful if there were fewer people from the Jinren Grotto Heaven. However, it was not easy for a cultivator to cultivate to this stage, so who would be willing to die for nothing? Therefore, in the end, a battle was inevitable. Jinren Pang suddenly raised his head. He looked over with a burning gaze and asked in a deep voice, "Then why don't our Xianmen join hands and kill the demons first? Using this to calm the chaos? If that's the case, I'm really willing to be the pioneer, even if my bones are crushed, I'm willing." Zhang Yan also looked at her and said, "Jinren Pang, did you forget? The Styx River in the Nether Spring sect?" The founder of the Nether Spring sect, Jinren Lingyu, had once passed down a Styx River. Not only could it produce demons, it could also pollute the spiritual opportunity of the world, and it wouldn't be used by cultivators for at least thousands of years. Once such a move was done, it would also cause the situation to collapse. Jinren Pang was silent for a moment and said, "We can let the Nether Spring sect go for now, but can't we get rid of the other sects first?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "The 6 demonic sections. How could the Nether Spring sect sit back and watch? They were bound together for good or ill. Moreover, this method can't solve the root of the problem. Even if we really destroy those demonic sects, after a few thousand years, the current situation will probably repeat itself. At that time, not only will our Xianmen have to fight again, I'm afraid that the Zhenyin demon will come out to cause trouble." In fact, in his opinion, it would be best if they could join forces with the Xianmen to kill the demonic sects first. At that time, after the roots of the earth were touched, they could avoid being attacked from all sides. However, if Qinsong School took the initiative to bring up this matter, even if there really was a treasure that could restrain the Styx River, Yu Xiao School would definitely be suspicious and would definitely not agree. Jinren Pang sighed and said, "What Jinren Zhang said makes sense. I was too careless." Wu Wei carefully asked, "May I ask Jinren Zhang, what does the Shaoqing sect mean?" When Jinren Pang heard that, he revealed a look of concern. The Shaoqing sect was also one of the 3 major sects of the Xianmen. Although the Grotto Heaven in the sect was inferior to the Yu Xiao and Qinsong sects, their combat power was not inferior to the 2 sections. The will of this sect was also extremely important. It could be said that whichever side they stood on would have a great chance of winning. Zhang Yan smiled and released his consciousness. He heard the sound of swords surging. Countless sword lights flew up behind him and circled above him. It was as bright as the galaxy, and it was unknown how many there were. When the two of them saw it, they cried out, "True sword of slaughter?" Zhang Yan looked at the two of them and smiled faintly. This is the intention of the Shaoqing sect. The two of them looked at each other and calmed down. The matter was clear. Zhang Yan was able to refine the true sword of slaughter in such a short period of time after entering the grotto heaven for less than 100 years. It was most likely because of the help of the Shaoqing sect. The Shaoqing sect and Qinsong sect were already on the same side. Jinren Wu chuckled and raised his hand to bow. He said, "My Ping City has been friends with your sect for generations. In this great calamity, I will naturally do my part." Jinren Pang bowed and said, "Your sect has been slaying demons and upholding the righteous path for tens of thousands of years. I will naturally follow closely behind." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. He invited the two of them here today to let the two sects take a pill of reassurance. However, the matter of the Qinsong school wanting to move the roots of the earth and taking the initiative to initiate a calamity would not be revealed until the last moment due to the great implications. In the depths of the Fengling Ocean, there was a 1,000-feet-long flood dragon that was shaking its head and wagging its tail as it traveled through the water. Wherever it passed by, the marine living beings in the sea would flee in fear of its might. When the flood dragon arrived at a valley, it turned around and transformed into a young man. It was Li Xiaomi who had traveled from the East Sea to this place. He closed his eyes and sensed for a long time. He pondered and said, "The Yuxiao sect is already prepared here. I should find another place to set up a formation." At this moment, the Fengling Ocean was already occupied by a few small sects that the Yuxiao sect had moved from the continent. They had also set up many restrictions. It was obviously not a good place to set up a foothold. He shook his body and transformed into the flood dragon again. He swam towards the depths of the South Sea. This time, he traveled more than 100,000 miles in one go. Seeing that the surrounding area was already far away from the Fengling Ocean, the Yuxiao school would not be able to detect him. Moreover, the spiritual vigor was not too weak. There should be many marine demonic cultivators around. He broke out of the water and found an island nearby. He let out a long and low cry. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, the hearts of those water-kind spirit creatures who had attained some level of cultivation palpitated, and they couldn't help but gather towards him. Soon, over 100 of them arrived. Seeing him, a flood dragon, all of them were terrified, their bodies shaking. However, every time they had the thought of escaping, they would be suppressed by a strange power and couldn't leave. Li Xiaomi transformed back into his human form. He took out the talisman given by the demon court and said, "I am the Marquis of the 9 divisions of the demon court, Flood Dragon Marquis Li Xiaomi. I have summoned all of you here to set up a restriction and an altar. I order all of you to go back and recruit people. 10 days later, come back here. If anyone disobeys, I will use my mana to annihilate your clan." The demons did not dare to disobey and quickly split up to search for their clansmen. Very quickly, 10 days had passed. The waves were rolling, but it was countless marine demonic cultivators. When they came near, there were many demons who had acquired spiritual wisdom and could speak human language. They all called out Marquis Li, while those in human form bowed. Li Xiaomi's gaze swept around and asked, "Are all the demons within 10,000 miles of this place here?" A hunchbacked Daoran laughed dryly and bowed, My clansmen are all here. There are only a few who are disobedient and are unwilling to come." Li Xiaomi looked at him and said in a deep voice, "You said that those who are disobedient, where are they?" The old Taoist cowered under his gaze, then he plucked up his courage and said, 2,000 miles north from here, there's a mermaid tribe, they don't think they're demons. Although I've invited them 100 times, they're still not willing to come forward." He then pointed to the south, also 1,500 miles south, there is a mirage worm. It has always been doing what it wants and has never listened to Marquis Li's orders. Li Xiaomi could not help but be interested. He had heard of mermen long ago, but he had never seen them since he started cultivating. He did not expect to see them here. His purpose of coming here was to command the marine demonic cultivators to open up the spirit veins at the bottom of the sea so that he could set up the formation. From his point of view, those stupid untrained demons were not as smart as the mermen. If he could find them, it would be much faster to set up the formation. As for the mirage worm, it could create the illusory mystic realm. If it was captured and placed in the formation, it could also be used to confuse the enemy. After thinking about it, he pointed to the Daorin and said, "When I am not here, you will be in charge of this place. Now, you will be given the position of chief supervisor." The Daorin was overjoyed. Li Xiaomi had the golden seal bestowed by the Demon King. After he was given the title, he could command the surrounding marine demonic cultivators when he was not here. This power was not small. He quickly knelt down to thank him. Li Xiaomi didn't say anything more to him. She turned into a rainbow and walked on the waves. After a few thousand miles, she saw many creatures that were half human and half fish. However, most of them looked strange and ugly. Only a few of them looked delicate and pretty. There were about 1,000 of them, male, female, old, and young. He did not talk to them at all. He took out a big cauldron and used a spell. A gust of wind and black smoke was produced, and all of them were stored inside. Then he kept the big cauldron and headed south. Chapter 1059. After the conversation between Pang Yunxiang, Wu Wei, and Zhang Yan, they stayed in Qinsong School for a few days. Let me tell you, in the past few days, according to the previous agreement, the disciples of the three families had a sword duel. Because it wasn't a battle of life and death, it was only for the sake of improving the friendship between the three clans. Naturally, it ended peacefully. As long as it was someone who participated in the battle, almost everyone would gain some benefits. Unknowingly, the day of ancestral Master Jade Tomb's ascension was approaching. Zhang Yan thought that it was time to make a move. After making the necessary arrangements in the hall, he boarded the dragon carriage and worked together with the people from Huanzhen Temple and Pingdu sect. They swept up the vast clear light and headed towards Mount Li. One day later, the mountains in the southwest of the Donghua continent appeared before everyone's eyes. The land that the Li Shan sect occupied was the highest among the three sects in the southwest. Usually, because of the prohibition, it was covered by a thick fog and no one could see the whole picture. However, it was different these few days. Because all the Taoists from the Xianmen sects had come to observe the ceremony, they had removed the formation and could see it at a glance. Zhenren Pang had always been cautious in his cultivation. Although Huanzhen was considered close to Mount Li, he had never been to this place before. At this moment, he saw the smoke in the distance and the morning breeze brushed past. There were 2 patches of green mountain scenery on the river. It was like a young lady adding makeup to her eyebrows. In the thick brush strokes, it was even more beautiful. She could not help but praise, "When have I seen such a beautiful scenery?" Wu Wei shook his head. Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh and said, "Could it be that Taoist Wu doesn't like this kind of scenery?" Wu Wei sighed and said, "More than 1,000 years ago, when I was still a child, I came here with my teacher. At that time, this place was still the mountain gate of Shiha sect. The scenery I saw wasn't what it is today, but a vast expanse of mountains and rivers. The place where Lishan sect was at was originally the dojo of Shiha sect, the inner temple of the sect. It had always been strict and disciplined, displaying its firmness to others. Moreover, there was a surging river outside, and the mountains were all small, making it appear even more imposing and upright. However, after perfected Yuling entered this place. Because her family established their own school of orthodoxy, in order to show that they were different from the previous school, they wantonly overhauled. Other than the dragon imprisoning well, the rest of the temples were demolished and smashed. He even used his strength to divide the river and block the flow of the river, turning the surging West River outside the gate into thousands of streams, springs, and waterfalls. He also filled the old site with peony, peony and other famous and precious flowers. As a result, the scenery on the surface of the mountain turned beautiful. Yesterday, his beard and eyebrows were all colored. Immortal Wu also knew that Jinren Yuling did this to prevent the world from regarding her as the successor of Shihe. She was ruthless to break the old tradition. However, a big Taoist orthodoxy was broken in front of her eyes, and now it was hard to find any trace of it. He also sighed with disappointment. As the three of them moved forward, they were already close to the formation. The mist before him gradually faded away, revealing a floating mountain range that spanned over 1,000 li, drifting and indistinct, clear light flowing through the air. This was clearly an immortal mountain spiritual residence. Immortal Wu pointed and said, "This is the original Yanliang Mountain, which is also the original main gate of Shihe sect." After Jinren Yuling achieved cave heaven, she used her supernatural power to break the cliffs and the floating mountain in the sky. Broken peaks and broken cliffs, floating mountains in the sky, and dozens of floating mountain continents were built on both sides. These are where the disciples of Mount Li live today. At this moment, the Lishan sect also noticed the arrival of the three cave heavens. Waves of celestial music were heard. The formation gate opened wide, stretching 1,000 feet high and dozens of li wide. Thousands of flower boats came out from inside, with colorful rings and light flowers dancing in the air. In the middle was a raft, with a heroic woman in white standing on it. She bowed and said in a clear voice, "Shin Zixin of Lishan sect welcomes the three Zenrens." After the greeting at the gate, Shin Zixin raised her hand and moved the raft away. The disciples of Lishan sect all moved to the sides, creating a flat road paved with flowers and clouds. They said in unison, respectfully welcoming the three Zenrens. Jinren Yuling was, after all, a senior of Xianmen. To show their respect, Zhang Yan and the other two got off the carriage in front of the formation and walked into the mountain. Behind them, the disciples of the three sects also got off their flying magical artifacts and followed their masters. After entering the mountain gate, the first thing they saw was a greeting hall. The front yard was wide and grand. After that, there was the Kuanhe Hall and the Guanrong Hall. The three halls were beautifully renovated and shone brightly. On the corridors on both sides, there were female cultivators carrying bamboo baskets passing by. Outside, there was a mountain of begonia that was beautiful and delicate, emitting waves of fragrance. After these three halls, there was a lotus heart path. Above the endless water abyss, lotus flowers could be seen floating over. Zhang Yan smiled and stepped on it. With every step, there would be a flower under his feet to welcome him. The three of them went straight to the right path at a moderate speed. In the water and clouds, their figures gradually disappeared. From afar, they were moving faster and faster. As for the disciples behind him, because of their different cultivation, many of them went further and further away. Not long after, they were separated into the front and back. Some of the impatient disciples saw that they couldn't keep up with their masters and wanted to use their techniques to escape. Just now, when they tried to use their techniques, they saw a vast expanse of whiteness in front of them. They couldn't see anything clearly. After flying for a while, they landed again. When they saw that they were stepping on the original lotus flowers, they knew that there was a formation blocking them. They could only obediently walk forward. However, as a result, everyone ended up in different places. However, no matter where they landed, there would naturally be a female ceremonial officer coming forward to lead them to the banquet. Zhang Yan and the other two were Jinren Yuling, so they didn't care about it. In a short while, they arrived at the water platform on the opposite side. Zhang Yan looked back and smiled. The lotus flower cleanses the heart and reflects the Tao emotion. This path that Jinren Yuling set up is the best way to test the Tao heart. Among the disciples, those who can reach here must have a determined heart and are wholeheartedly focused on the Tao. Master Pang and Master Wu both agreed. The three of them looked around and saw that they were standing on a large hill. There were many pavilions here. The sky was connected to the clouds, the stairs were connected to the corridors, the wind blew and water flowed. It was also filled with hundreds of flowers and ancient trees. On the peak of the mountain was a large lake. Looking down from the sky, the dew was like a plate, and the waves were dense. If one were to go on a boat on the water, they would be able to enjoy the sun and clouds in the morning and sleep on the moon in the evening. Master Pang said, I heard that Zhenren Yuling carved out a mountain in the mountains and made it into a garden. I think this is the place. Master Wu shook his head and said, in this Lishan sect, only Zhenren Yuling is supporting it. Yet she did this. This kind of sacrifice of cultivation in exchange for the beauty of the mountains and rivers is not something we can accept. Master Pang had a different view and said, Taoist Wu, you are wrong. Even so, Zhenren Yuling still cultivated to this stage and ascended. Among us, how many people can compare? Master Wu chuckled and didn't argue. He said, you are right, Master Pang. Although he said that, he didn't agree. For Zhenren Yuling to be able to have this day, his talent was extraordinary and few people could compare to him. But in the end, he took advantage of West River sect and was able to oversee the spiritual eye, which was why he had this day. What he admired the most was still Guangyuan sect's Xinchong. He had no one to rely on and was able to forcefully open a path to ascension from his own sect. But even so, after he left, Guangyuan sect also fell. If Li Shan's sect didn't have a successor, then in his eyes, it was very likely that they would follow in his footsteps. At this moment, in the Lotus Heart Path, Wei Zihong was walking forward and returning. He was the only disciple under Zhang Yan. His cultivation was the highest among the disciples of the 3 sections. Because he was walking at the front, a disciple behind him said, this Taoist came here before, do you know about this path? Wei Zihong thought. When I returned, the Li Shan disciples only opened a side door for me. It was just a cursory glance and the people I saw were not many, so how would I know about all these? But since Master didn't say, it shouldn't be a big deal, so I'll just go with the flow. But not long later, he saw that he was standing still and getting further and further away from the disciples, so he cupped his hands on the water and said to the few people he was familiar with, fellow Taoists, then I'll make a move first. After saying that, he walked forward on the lotus. But he didn't walk far. Suddenly, he felt something and turned his head to look. He saw a Pingdu disciple floating behind him, only a few hundred feet behind him. There were 3 lotus flowers under his feet. He seemed to be hesitating about where to go. His heart stirred and he called out, fellow Taoist, can you come over here? Although the Taoist couldn't see where he was because of the mist in front of him, he didn't hesitate to walk in the direction of the voice. Very quickly, he came close and saw Wei Zihong. He bowed and said, thank you for pointing out the right path. I am Lan Yanchu, may I know your name? Wei Zihong raised his hands and bowed, saying his name too. Lan Yanchu was enlightened, so it's Yaoyin Wei sect leader, no wonder, no wonder. The two of them exchanged some pleasantries and walked together. On the way, they met an Ana temple disciple called Kong Shudong. She was very beautiful and elegant. Like Wei Zihong, she was also in the 3rd stage. Among the 3 of them, Lan Yanchu's cultivation was the lowest, but he didn't fall behind. Very quickly, he finished the Lotus Heart Path and stepped on a row of jade steps. He raised his head and saw 3 people standing in front of him. They were the 3 enlightened masters. He hurriedly went forward to greet his master. Enlightened Master Wu saw Lan Yanchu among them and was surprised. Yanchu, I didn't expect you to be able to reach here. Lan Yanchu bowed and said, this disciple is ashamed. It was Taoist Wei who called out to me on the way, that's why I got lost. Zhang Yan smiled. Taoist Wu, although your disciple's cultivation isn't enough, if he can pass the Lotus Heart Path, then his future achievements won't be bad. Wu Wei nodded subconsciously. Pingdu sect was different from other sections. Their cultivation was all above the Dharma spirit. Therefore, many disciples only focused on cultivating the Dharma spirit and neglected the foundation. Lan Yanchu was a rare person who didn't forget this. He couldn't help but think that when he returned, he should give this disciple more guidance. At the same time, he thought to himself, Yuling Zhenren set up this path to test the disciple's Tao heart. It's quite a big favor for all the sects who came. At this moment, there was a sudden jingle. A female cultivator walked over and stopped in front of the 3 of them. She curtsied and said, My master specially ordered me to welcome the 3 enlightened masters. May the 3 enlightened masters please move your jade toes. Enlightened Master Pang saw that she was also in the 3rd stage and said, Your cultivation isn't bad. Which disciple of you Ling Jinren? The female cultivator bowed and replied, Thank you for your question, Enlightened Master Pang. I am Ming Huaping, the 8th disciple of Mr. Dushan. I have reached this stage a few months ago, just now. After she finished speaking, she bowed again and led the way. Several people followed her, crossing 3 bridges spanning the river. After another 100 or so steps, they arrived in front of a large hall. A horizontal inscribed board was hung above the hall, with 3 characters Ding Hong Gong written on it. Ming Huaping halted her steps. Restraining herself, she said, 3 Zenrens, Ensure is waiting respectfully in the palace. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and waved his sleeves. He calmly walked up the stairs. Pang and Wu Zhe were a step behind. Wei Zihong, Lan Yanchu, and the rest naturally couldn't follow, so they waited outside the hall. The disciple of Anjin Temple, Kong Shutong, looked boldly at Ming Huaping. The latter was slightly annoyed and said, What are you doing? Kong Shutong asked, I heard that a talented female disciple from Li Mountain sect has already decided to marry a disciple of Yu Xiaozhou. Is she talking about you? Ming Huaping lowered her head and said softly, This has nothing to do with you. Kong Shutong smiled and took out something from his sleeves. Just now that you are leading the way, I am giving you something to express my gratitude. Ming Huaping glanced at it and saw that it was a phoenix pen with a poem engraved on it. Looking back at the moon by the window, lifting the curtain to recall the past, looking at the painting in the distance, a small boat leaving the red of the past. For some reason, her heart fluttered and she hesitated for a moment before accepting it. She said, Thank you, Taoist. Zhang Yan and the rest had already entered the Dinghong Palace. They looked up and saw that the hall was vast and boundless. Rainbow lights danced on top of the hall, but they were suppressed by a round jade. They flew back and forth in the hall and shone brightly. There was a jade path in the middle. Yuling Jinren was wearing a white robe with a high bun. She was beautiful and she was sitting on the main seat. On top of her head, there were streams of light flowing and rippling as if they were in harmony with the rainbow lights. It was obvious that her real body was here. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes while Pang and Wu Zhe quickly lowered their heads and didn't dare to look. Yuling Jinren stood up and lifted her sleeves. Jinren Zhang, greetings. She then said to Pang and Wu Zhe, Jinren, greetings. The 3 of them also cupped their fists and returned the greeting. Yuling Jinren exchanged a few polite words with them and then said to Zhang Yan, Recently, someone presented a stalk of spiritual flower to me, claiming that it can distinguish the true form of demons and demons. It's just that I can't tell if it's real or not. Jinren Zhang is a disciple of Qinsong School. I wonder if you would do me the honor to take a look? Zhang Yan smiled and said, With such a magical item, I must take a look. Pang and Wu Zhe knew that she had something to say to Zhang Yan, so they excused themselves. Yuling Jinren didn't urge them to stay. She called a female disciple and said, Come, send these 2 fellow Taoists to Xian Xian and Drunken Immortal to settle down. After the 2 of them left, Yuling Jinren invited Zhang Yan to take a seat and ordered a maid to serve fragrant tea. She then said, In 3 days I will ascend. After I leave, I hope that your honorable sect will take care of my sect's disciples for the sake of our past relationship. Zhang Yan nodded and said, As a disciple of Xianmen, if your honorable sect is in trouble, I will definitely lend a helping hand. Yuling Jinren pondered for a moment and said, That disciple of mine, Fang Rujia, fought together with your disciple, Wei Zihong, a few times. They hit it off quite well. After she returned to the sect, she couldn't forget her. As her master, seeing that I am about to leave, I also want to find a home for her. What does Jinren think? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, As long as the sect's disciples are agreeable, I will naturally not stop them. Yuling Jinren nodded and her eyes softened. To her, as long as Zhang Yan did not stop them, this matter was already 90% successful. With the Qinsong School's Hall Master Duzhen behind them, Mount Li would be safe for hundreds of years in the future. If within this period of time, one of the disciples was able to produce a heavenly abode person and inherit her treasure, the sect would have something to rely on. At least, they wouldn't be afraid of ordinary enemies. If not, then it would depend on the fate of the younger generation. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1060. Lishan sect had built 16 temples on the mountain cloud pool sea. The locations of the temples corresponded to the 16 mysterious demon sects of Donghua continent. Zhang Yan's location was in the north of the Dipper Palace. At this moment, he sat on the futon and looked at the scenery outside the palace at night. He saw that in every palace, there were fluorescent lights flashing, stars gathering, and bronze beams shining. It was abnormally grand. He turned his head and looked at the palace that represented Lishan sect and saw that it was located at the highest point. One could imagine that although Yuling Jinren was a woman, her heroism didn't lose to that of a man. When she built Lishan sect, she had the ambition to be above all the sects of Donghua. It was a pity that although she was talented, her methods of ruling the sect and teaching her disciples were slightly lacking. Until now, no one had been able to support Lishan sect. This might be a dilemma. After all, starting in orthodoxy required a lot of effort. She also had to take care of her own cultivation. More importantly, she didn't have anyone from the same sect to help her. It wasn't easy to get to this stage. Jingyu came closer and bowed. "Master, Jinren Wei is here." Zhang Yan said, "Let him in." Wei Zihong walked in slowly and came behind him. He bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, Master." Zhang Yan raised his sleeves and pointed at the scenery in front of him. "What do you think of the layout of Lishan?" Wei Zihong didn't even think and said, "It's just an illusion." Not only was he Zhang Yan's disciple, but he was also the sect leader of the Yaoyin sect. He had also interacted with several Dongtian Zenrens, so his knowledge was much higher than his peers. Naturally, he could understand Jinren Yuling's intention in setting up this scenery. However, he didn't think so. Those who were capable didn't speak, and those who spoke couldn't. In his eyes, Jinren Yuling created this land. She could only entertain herself. Zhang Yan said again, "What about the future of Lishan sect?" Wei Zihong thought about it and said with certainty, "In the next 100 years, if a Dongtian Jinren can appear, there is still hope. Otherwise, even if there are outsiders protecting it, once the favor is gone, we must experience the calamity of Shiha in the past." If the Lishan sect was an ordinary sect, it would obediently attach itself to a large sect and no one would make things difficult for it. However, it happened to occupy a spirit cave. Relying on the favor left behind by Yuling Jinren, it might be able to last for a while. However, if no one came out to support the sect, the outcome would be obvious. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. Only now did he turn around and said, "In the daytime, Yuling Jinren invites your master to drink tea. She wishes to betroth one of her disciples, Fang Rojia, to you. What do you think?" Wei Zihong couldn't help but be startled when he heard this. His deepest wish was to pursue the Tao wholeheartedly. Naturally, the less he had to worry about in this world, the better. Moreover, he had his own inheritance and did not need anything from the Li Mountain sect. There was no need to form karma. Sometimes too deeply involved. Once one fell into a trap, it would be extremely difficult to escape. For example, if it wasn't for the fact that Jinren Yuling's disciples were worried, she would have ascended a long time ago. Why would she need to stay here? After careful consideration, he raised his head and said, "Can I decline?" "Zhang Yan, it's up to you. If you don't think it's possible, then decline." Wei Zihong hesitated for a moment. When he was at Fengling Ocean, he knew a little about the two sects working together. He said, "I just don't know. Will it hinder Master's great plan?" Zhang Yan laughed and said, "You don't need to think about this. Jinren Yuling will not fuss over this. Even if there are difficulties, I will take care of it." Jinren Yuling had come to this step and all the arrangements had been made. Ascension was imperative and not something that could be influenced by a small matter like this. Her marriage with Qinsong School was only for peace of mind. But to say that she would fall out with him because of this, was underestimating the magnanimity of an ascended Jinren. Just as the master and disciple were talking, Jing Yu walked in and said, "Master, there's a Li Mountain disciple outside. He says he's here to invite Jinren Wei to meet him." Wei Zihong looked at Zhang Yan. The latter waved his sleeve at him and said, "Go." Wei Zihong bowed solemnly and walked out in big strides. Zhang Yan got up from the pudan and slowly walked to the high platform at the top of the Dipper Palace. He sat down and breathed in and slowly circulated his Xian Qi. After a short while, he suddenly heard a loud sound from outside that shook the mountains and rivers. It was hard not to notice this kind of noise. He raised his head and saw the sky was illuminated by rosy clouds. Thunderbolts startled the clouds, starlight and clear air filled the vast space, illuminating the moonlit night as if it was daytime. He knew that Yu Xiao, Nenhua, Tai Hao and Bu Tian, these 4 Jinren had also arrived. After another 2 hours, he saw 5 or 4 rays of clear light flying over and landing in the palaces of each sect. Suddenly, there were a few low thuds and a Dharma appeared, swallowing the spiritual opportunity. Grotto Heaven cultivators, as long as they achieved the upper techniques, they only needed to breathe and regulate their breathing. However, it was different for cultivators who achieved the middle and lower techniques. When they did not use the Danjade to cultivate, they would sometimes activate their Dharma to match the spiritual opportunity and train themselves. However, they could not go overboard at this place. In addition, they had to respect Jinren Yuling's ascension. Therefore, they only hid themselves and did not release their qi at once. However, Lishan sect's spiritual opportunity was limited. Even though Jinren Yuling could no longer use spiritual opportunity after taking that step, it was obvious that there were many Grotto Heaven Zenrens rushing in. Therefore, they did not hesitate to fight with each other. Yu Xiao, Tai Hao, Nanhua and Bu Tian were allies. Naturally, they worked together to expel Huanjin and Ping Du under the joint attack of the 4. Pang and Wu were soon unable to resist and had no choice but to retreat back to their own palaces. However, the other party did not seem to want to stop. Under the lead of the starlight, they chased after them. It looked like they wanted to completely subdue the 2 of them and take all the spiritual opportunity here. Bo Jingsu could not bear to watch this, so he communicated to the other Grotto Heaven Zenrens, "We are all from the same Shen. Isn't this too much?" Huang Yugong's expression was calm and he did not say anything. Jinren sure sneered, "This is a battle of spiritual opportunity. There is no room for retreat." Did Taoist Bo forget how Bu Tian Mountain fell from the sky? As soon as he said this, Bo Jingsu did not say anything. This time, Yu Xiao sect sent people to Zhou and Wu to show their sincerity. The person who made a move was Zhou Ruing. She humphed and said, "Taoist sure is right. If you retreat, others will advance. In such a situation, one must subdue the enemy in one go. It is better to make them unable to rise again." Bu Jingsu sighed deeply. Although he was unwilling, he couldn't back down at this moment. He could only apologize to himself and increase his magic power. Jinren Yuling was standing at the top of the river calming palace, looking at the scene below. Eldest disciple Shin Zixin was standing behind. However, the battle between the Grotto Heaven Zenrens shook the entire mountain. It was as if Li Mountain could be destroyed at any time. Even with the protection of the Grand Formation, her heart still trembled as she watched, and she was extremely worried. She couldn't help but say, "Master, this..." Jinren Yuling raised his hand and said casually, "It's fine. Since they are interested, let them do as they please. If I go to another world, I don't know if I can see this." Shin Zixin heard this and could not help but ask. He couldn't help but ask, "Teacher, what does the outer world void sky look like?" Jinren Yuling turned around and smiled at her. "If I tell you, it will only disturb your Tao heart. It is better not to listen." She looked up at the sky. The palace below her was called River Calming Palace. The so-called Calming River meant to suppress the West River. Since she had broken the West River orthodoxy, there was no decree to receive her. After ascending, she had to find her own way. She might get lost in the virtual sky. However, she did not regret it. To be able to cultivate her Tao heart, mind, and will far surpass her peers. Naturally, she would not retreat. At this moment, the situation below was one-sided. In such a head-on clash, those with weaker mana would naturally be at a disadvantage. Pang Yunxiang and Wu Wei retreated step by step. They were about to be completely suppressed. However, right at this moment, the entire mountain suddenly shook, and then a strand of boundless profound energy rumbled as it charged out from the Dipper Palace in the north. Rumble! It firmly resisted the 4 Dharma images and actually caused them to be unable to advance even an inch. Zhang Yan. Zhou Ruing gritted her teeth and looked up angrily. She had expected that the two of them would not be forced back. However, she did not expect him to stop the 4 of them by himself. However, a scene that caused her to be even more horrified appeared. That strand of profound energy seemed to still be unsatisfied, and it was actually slowly expanding to suffuse the sky. Not only were the 4 of them unable to gain an advantage over it, they were pushed back instead. The spirits of Pang and Wu couldn't help but be greatly refreshed when they saw this scene, and they were just about to lend a hand and turn the situation around when Zhang Yan's voice transmission entered into their ears at this moment. Both of you can just cultivate at the back. Allow this Taoist to have a short spar with these fellow Taoists. When the two of them heard this, they saw that the situation was advantageous. They guessed that he must be confident, so they stopped. However, they did not really relax their cultivation. Instead, they were on guard. They were ready to go up and help him if they saw that he was unable to hold on. Under the invasion of the chaotic profound energy that surged over and occupied the area for a long time, Zhou Ruiying's group of 4 retreated without end, and it wasn't long before they were actually forced back to the palace they resided in. This was the same as the situation just now. However, the two sides had switched. However, even in such a situation, the 4 of them stubbornly held on and refused to retreat. They were still trying to preserve their last shred of face. Zhang Yan looked forward with an indifferent expression. He had achieved Tao with the supreme law. The world was the spiritual cave. If the other party was not afraid of exhausting their mana, he would be happy to accompany them. After a while, Jinrenbu felt that he could not hold on anymore. He smiled bitterly and said, "My mana is not enough. I will retreat first." As he said this, he withdrew his mana. With his retreat, the other 3 could not hold on anymore. They all took the initiative to retreat before their mana was completely destroyed. At this moment, above the gate of Li Mountain Sect, a chaotic Xian Qi floated and covered the world, suppressing all the palaces. Shen Zixin saw this scene and was in disbelief. She said, "I didn't expect Jinren Zhang to win?" Jinren Yuling looked forward and said, "Jinren Zhang's aptitude is rare for thousands of years. It is not surprising that he can suppress the 4 fellow Taoists in mana. However, in a real battle of mana, it is not so easy to determine the winner." She thought for a moment and said to Shen Zixin, "Go and call Jinren Wei, who is waiting outside in the room." In Zhu Yu Palace, Zhou Ruing retracted his dharma. He looked slightly displeased and said to a Taoist beside him, "Jinren Wu, why are you just watching from the sidelines just now?" Wu Yunbi said calmly, "Jinren Zhou, you misunderstood me. I wanted to help, but did you forget that Pang Yunxiang and Wu Wei are still here? If I help, they will definitely come to help and the result will be the same. Why waste so much effort? Moreover, this is Li Mountain's territory. I have to give Jinren Yuling some face. Don't go overboard." Zhou Ruing thought about it and knew that he was in the wrong. Although he was still a little dissatisfied, he could not do anything. He could only apologize. "I misspoke. Senior Marshal Brother Wu, please don't blame me." Wu Yunbi waved his sleeve and said, "It's fine. However, in my opinion, it is a good thing to try today. In the past, we only knew that Jinren Zhang's mana was strong, but we did not know to what extent. Now that we have seen it, we have an idea. In the future when Taoist Huang wants to fight with Jinren Zhang, we can be prepared." Zhou Ruing said with slight contempt, "Huang Yugong? How can he be Zhang Yan's opponent?" Wu Yunbi also said, "That's right. Now it seems that Taoist Huang's chances of winning are not high. However, I have to ask, Jinren Zhang is already so powerful now. What about in a few hundred years?" Zhou Ruing thought about it and her expression changed. In a few hundred years, if there were no accidents, Zhang Yan would reach the second stage of the elephant realm and open his own cave. He would probably be much more powerful than now. Thinking of that scene, her heart also tightened. Wu Yunbi said in a deep voice, "After all, we are allies with the Southern Flower Sect. If Taoist Huang wants to fight with Zhenren Zhang, then let him fight. We can also borrow a few artifacts from him to protect ourselves and try to delay the battle. In this way, we can exhaust Zhang Yan's mana. If we can delay his cultivation, even if we lose, we will still win in the grand scheme of things." Zhou Ruiying pondered for a moment, then nodded lightly and said, "Senior Marshall Brothers' words are exactly the same as in the play. I understand. Tomorrow, I will invite fellow Taoist Huang to discuss this with him." About 4 hours later, Wei Zihong returned to the Spoon Battle Palace. He went in front of his teacher and bowed, saying, "Teacher." Zhang Yan opened his eyes and said, "You are back. What is your choice?" If Zhenren Yuling was willing to spend effort to persuade a junior disciple, it was not impossible. In fact, he might even put some pressure on him. Moreover, he purposely did not expose him because he wanted to test his disciple's Dao heart. Passing the Lotus Heart Dao was nothing. However, in front of a sect's founder, an ascended Zhenren, one could only be considered to have passed the test. Wei Zihong said seriously, "Disciple did not agree." However, Sect Master Yuling gave disciple an item and disciple could not reject it. He took out an item from his sleeve. It was a pool of clear water. It looked calm, but one could hear the sound of crashing tides. Zhang Yan took a look and said with a smile, "I didn't expect to give you this item. Although with your current cultivation, you still can't control it. However, you owe me a big favor. But no matter if Mount Li is in trouble in the future, I can help you repay it." Chapter 1061. Wei Zihong asked curiously, "Master, what is this thing?" Zhang Yan said, "You should know that the predecessor of Lishan sect was Shiha sect. This branch also came from the West continent. This sect had left many treasures. But after Yuling Zhenren took over the spirit cave, she didn't use any of the treasures in the sect. At least Yuling Zhenren had never used the genuine weapon of Shiha sect in front of others. Even the formation of the mountain gate was paid a lot to invite many people to set it up. So some people guessed that her action of cutting off the orthodoxy of Shiha made the real spirits in the sect unhappy and unwilling to be driven by her. But there were other theories. They thought that she deliberately didn't use the treasures of the former sect to show that Lishan sect and Shiha sect were two different sections. Zhang Yan concluded that one more genuine weapon meant one more trick. Yuling Zhenren wasn't a pedantic person. At the beginning of the sect, he wouldn't let go of any magic weapon that could increase his tricks. How could he refuse such a benefit? The real reason was probably that the real spirits didn't want to obey, so they were suppressed and sealed. But then Yuling Zhenren's cultivation improved and the power of Lishan sect stabilized. They didn't meet any opponents, so they didn't need it anymore. But now, it didn't matter if they had it or not. Wei Zihong asked tentatively, "So this clear water is also left by Shiha sect?" Zhang Yan's gaze became deep and said, "If I'm not wrong, this water should be the water of Shiha." He could naturally sense that although it was just a pool of clear water in front of him, if it were to be activated, it would truly be a surging long river that contained an immeasurable amount of water. Moreover, this water had long been refined as one. If it was someone who was proficient in water attribute Xian arts, if it was released when fighting against an enemy, it could double one's mana. Even if it wasn't used like this, it was still very effective to cultivate with the boundless water qi in it. Wei Zihong was slightly surprised and said, "Water of Shiha? How could Yuling Zhenren give this to his disciple?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There should be more than this Shiha water. After many generations of cultivators intercepted it and no one continued to refine it, I'm afraid there's not even 1 out of 100 left. Otherwise, even Yuling Zhenren wouldn't give it away so easily." Wei Zihong thought for a while. "My cultivation method doesn't need it, so I'm willing to give it to you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I have no use for this item. However, if no one refines this water, it will slowly dissipate over time. I can help you refine it, and it should be able to recover some of its former power. When you have some achievements in cultivation, I will return it to you. By then, you can decide how you want it." He raised his hand, and the puddle of water flew up. Then, a watercolored brilliance flashed behind him. Then he let it into it and shook. Wei Zihong thought to himself, even if I could reach Master's level, it would be a waste to take this water. Under Master's tutelage, there is only one person who practices water elemental Xian skills, and that is eldest martial sister. Why don't I give it to her in the future? At the same time, in another place, after Huang Yu and Zhang Yan's powers collided, he no longer dared to reveal his Dharma form to snatch the spiritual opportunity. He could only sit in the hall and meditate. In less than an hour, a child came to report, "Master, 2 spiritual masters from the Yuxiao school invite you over to discuss some matters." Yellow Feather thought for a moment and thought that it must be because of the battle, so he got up and left the hall, transforming into a ray of clear light and headed towards Juyu Hall. When he arrived at the entrance, there was no need for him to announce his arrival before he stepped into the palace. This palace was 100 zhang tall, and the roof was made of colored glass. Specks of starlight could be seen, perfectly matching the celestial bodies of the heavens. However, the surroundings were illusory, and it was unknown how deep and vast it was. He could not help but nod. It was just like the Chongling Palace where he was. The palaces and pavilions covered a mountain. There was a waterfall and ancient pine forest that could accommodate hundreds of beasts and birds. It was obvious that the palaces built by the Lishan sect were compatible with the Xian skills of the various sections. They had put in a lot of effort. By this time, a maid had stepped forward and bowed to him, leading him into the inner hall. He saw that other than Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi, 2 people, Shi Jinren and Bu Jingsu had also arrived. Wu Yunbi got up and bowed, saying, "Daoist Huang, please take a seat." Huang Yugong returned the greeting and sat down after greeting everyone present. Wu Yunbi said, "Just now, when I joined forces with everyone to fight Zhang Jinren, I think I have seen his mana. If Daoist Huang wants to fight with Zhang Jinren in the future, it will not be easy to win." Huang Yugong never had any thoughts of winning. He just wanted to fight a few rounds and then admit defeat. However, he could not say it out loud, so he only said, "I can only do my best." Wu Yunbi smiled, "You cannot win, but it is not difficult to hold on for a few rounds." When Huang Yugong heard him say this, he suddenly had a bad feeling, saying, "Daoist friend, what do you mean?" Zhou Ruiying said, "After discussing, we can borrow a few treasures from Daoist friend. When we face Zhang Yan again, we will have the ability to fight." Huang Yugong immediately declined, saying, "Why do you have to do this? How can I take your things?" Wu Yunbi smiled and said, "Daoist Huang, you're wrong. The people imprisoned in the Biu Pavilion are not only the disciples of your Southern Flower sect, but also the disciples of our 3 sections. Since Daoist Huang has come forward to seek justice, as your allies, we can't just stand by and do nothing. Daoist Huang, please don't decline." Spiritual Master Shi said, "I, Tai Hao, and Southern Flower have always been on the same side. Since Daoist friend Huang is fighting, you should do your part." Everyone spoke one after another, putting Huang Yugong on a pedestal. At this moment, how could he not understand their intention? They obviously wanted to use him to wear down Zhang Yan's mana. However, after a few thoughts flashed through his mind, he realized that since things had come to this, he had no choice but to accept it. However, with the treasures gifted by other sects, he might still be able to fight. He sighed inwardly, raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Since that's the case, I thank you for your kindness." Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi looked at each other and nodded secretly. Huang Yugong was more tactful than they expected. Zhou Ruiying took out a jade box and placed it in front of him, saying, "Daoist Huang, please take a look." Since Huang Yugong had already been pushed to this step, he did not think about anything else. He used his mana to take the jade box into his hand. Just now, when he opened it, he saw a flash of white light, causing his face to turn cold. He almost could not open his eyes. He used his mana to take a look and immediately closed his eyes, saying, "I didn't expect the 2 of you to lend this item to me." How generous of you. Wu Yunbi smiled, saying, Taoist Huang, you are wrong. This item is only lent to you by Junior Marshal Sister Zhou. I am also taking a treasure. He also took out an item, but it was shrouded in a ball of black fog, making it impossible to see what it was. He gave it to Huang Yugong and said, It is not convenient to open it here. Taoist friend, you can go back and take a look. Huang Yugong saw the fog floating over and it was difficult to see what it was, so he readily accepted it. With a shake of his sleeve, he kept it. Spiritual Master Shi said, Taoist Huang, I have a jade jasper purple sun seed here. I have refined it for a long time. I can lend it to you. As he said this, he took out a round treasure seed that was faintly glowing with purple lightning. Huang Yugong was slightly shocked. He knew that the jade jasper purple sun seed was different from many other treasures. The smaller it was refined, the more powerful it would be. This seed was only the size of a soybean, but its power was greater than a normal true artifact. He and Spiritual Master Shi could be considered good friends, but he had never heard him mention this. He unconsciously looked at him and said, I have known you for many years. We can be considered to be close. I didn't expect you to have such a treasure. Spiritual Master Shi cupped his hands and said, I won't hide it from you. According to the sect's rules, this jade jasper purple sun seed can only be used by Taihao disciples. However, Taoist Huang has encountered a strong opponent in this battle. Even if I break the sect's rules, I am willing to take it out. Wu Yunbi smiled and said, Spiritual Master Shi is a righteous person. Taoist Huang, please accept it. I don't want to waste Spiritual Master Shi's good intentions. Huang Yugong didn't say much. With a wave of his hand, he took the treasure seed and kept it. At this moment, everyone's gaze landed on Bu Jingsu. Bu Tian Pavilion had always been famous for forging artifacts. This time, they had brought many artifacts that they gifted to Li Mountain sect. Who knew what good things they would bring out now? Bu Jingsu seemed to be thinking about something and suddenly asked, Taoist friend, what kind of artifact do you think I lack to fight Spiritual Master Zhang? Huang Yugong thought about it seriously for a while. Zhang Yan's transcendence energy was tyrannical and could last for a long time. It was not a wise move to attack him head-on. Moreover, he did not intend to fight him head-on. He planned to move around while facing the enemy, which usually required him to have a teleportation transcendent artifact. However, he could use his spiritual wings to move, and his speed wasn't slow either. Therefore, he didn't need such an item. His only concern was that his magic power was weaker than the opponent's. After a long battle, he might run out of energy. He muttered, a battle with Spiritual Master Zhang will take up a lot of time. I'm afraid I'll run out of vital qi early on. Bu Jingsu thought about it and said, It's not that there's no way, but I don't have such a treasure on me at the moment. The sect does have something called the Open Heart Plate. It can be used to borrow magic power during a battle. I can ask Sect Master Senior Brother to send someone to deliver it. Wu Yunbi was afraid that things would change if this dragged on, so he said, There are still 3 days before Spiritual Master Yuling ascends. We need to challenge him before that. Can I trouble Spiritual Master Bu to send a letter for your sect master to deliver the treasure? Bu Jingsu said, Of course. He pointed with his finger, and a spiritual light floated out. In a split second, it condensed into a talisman. With a gentle push, it flew out the door. Only an hour later, a letter came back. He took it and glanced at it. He said, When this treasure comes, I'm afraid it won't be able to pass through Mount Li's formation. I need to personally receive it. Everyone, please wait a moment. He bowed and retreated. After a short while, he returned to the hall. This time, he was holding a large plate in his hand. Its appearance was a little strange. The plate was long and thin, with a trumpet mouth at the bottom. There was a cover at the mouth of the plate, and the top and bottom were aligned. Those who didn't know what was going on would mistake it for a spinning top. At this moment, the plate suddenly turned into smoke and turned into a short Taoist. He chuckled and bowed to the people in the grotto heaven, saying, Which Zhenren here needs my help? Huang Yugong said in a deep voice, It's me. The short Taoist ran to him with his short legs and stretched out a hand. he said arrogantly, then hand it over. Huang Yugong was startled. What is it? The short Taoist turned around and complained to Bu Jingsu, you didn't tell them my rules. Bu Jingsu bowed and said, I didn't have time to explain. The short Taoist was slightly dissatisfied. He coughed and said, if spiritual masters need my help, just bring me the pill jade. The more you bring, the harder I will work. Spiritual master sure frowned. You want the pill jade? The short Taoist rolled his eyes and said, Perfected one, how can I work for free? Zhou Ruiying said, You are a true spirit, what use do you have for the pill jade? The short Taoist chuckled. This has nothing to do with spiritual masters. I won't get any benefits. When I'm on the battlefield, I won't be able to use my strength. Everyone couldn't help but look at Bu Jingsu. The latter immediately said, Don't look at me. This is spiritual master Chang Xing. I have to call him martial uncle. Wu Yunbi understood that the true spirits all had strange tempers. It was useless to reason with them. If they couldn't be suppressed by force, they could only go along with their wishes. He made a prompt decision. The three of us will provide the pill jade. We won't mistreat spiritual master Chang Xing. The short Taoist clasped his hands behind his back and said, Since this is the first time we're dealing with each other, seeing that spiritual masters are sincere, I'll give you a discount. The reward can be collected later. Huang Yugong was afraid that he would cause more trouble. Then it's decided. I'll have to rely on spiritual master when I fight in the future. The short Taoist laughed. He turned into a wisp of white smoke and disappeared into Huang Yugong's sleeve. Huang Yugong stood up and said, Everyone, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Everyone knew that he had obtained a few treasures and needed to study them. They didn't stop him and sent him off. They then dispersed and returned to their own residences. The night passed. On the second day, Zhang Yan just now came out of Dingzhong. He heard that spiritual master Yuling had something to ask of him, so he followed him to River Calming Palace. When he arrived at the palace, he saw spiritual master Yuling sitting on the main seat. Nanhua Huang Yugong sat on the cattail husk. He smiled faintly, came up to greet the two of them, and also sat down. Spiritual master Yuling said, Spiritual master Zhang, fellow Huang has something to discuss with you. He said that it involves the affairs of several families. He's afraid that he can't explain it clearly, so he asked me to be his witness. Zhang Yan looked over and said, I wonder what you're looking for eye for? Huang Yugong bowed and said, Spiritual Master Zhang, a month ago, the disciples of our two families fought in front of Biu Pavilion due to a misunderstanding. My disciples and a few of my fellow Taoists were captured by the spiritual master's disciple. There was also a disciple who cultivated Dharmakaya that was locked up in the Yaoyin clan. I was hoping that spiritual master would do me a favor and let them go. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I see. There must be a reason for it to come to this. However, I have no intention of meddling in the affairs of the younger generation. He turned to spiritual master Yuling and said, Leader Yuling, can you call my disciple, Wei Zihong, in to talk to spiritual master Huang? Spiritual master Yuling said, Of course. She instructed, and a maidservant immediately went out. Huang Yugong frowned. It wasn't because Wei Zihong was only a junior and didn't deserve to talk to him. It was because Zhang Yan obviously didn't want this matter to be related to Qinsong School. This was different from his original plan. He thought to himself, I knew you would say that. However, since you're sitting here today, I have a way to get you involved. Chapter 1062. Huang Yugong thought for a moment and felt that he had a part in talking to Wei Zihong, so he said a few words to a servant girl beside him. He ordered her to summon a disciple here as well. Not long after, Wei Zihong arrived at the hall and walked to the front with a calm expression. He bowed to the two Zenrins and his teacher in the hall. Zhang Yan said, Zhenren Huang, my disciple is here. If you have anything to say, just tell him. Huang Yugong did not speak. After waiting for a while, a South Flower disciple walked into the hall. He looked like a person who had cultivated a Dharmakaya. After greeting Zhenren Yuling and Zhang Yan, he went in front of them and respectfully greeted them, Martial Uncle. Huang Yugong nodded and gestured to him. He then turned around and smiled at Wei Zihong. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Brother Wei, I am Huang Ci, a disciple of the Nanhua sect. This time, my sect was disciplining my own sect, but your Yutsong sect suddenly interfered and captured my junior brother and a few other fellow Taoists. May I know the reason?" Wei Zihong maintained a calm expression on his face as he leisurely said, "I'm afraid Brother Huang is mistaken. That Blue Plume Pavilion is not a subordinate sect of your esteemed sect. It has been many years since they established their own sect. This time, it was your disciple who first bullied a fellow Taoist. I, along with a few of my fellow disciples, had no choice but to act out of righteous indignation." Huang Ci flicked his sleeves and said, "Regardless of the reason, how can Brother Wei release my junior brothers and fellow Taoists?" Wei Zihong looked at him and said, "I'm not an unreasonable person, but more than a dozen Blue Feather Pavilion disciples were murdered, and their deaths can't be in vain. It's only right that they be compensated." Huang Ci frowned and said, "A dozen disciples died? I sympathize with them. How about this? I will make the decision. Those who have not reincarnated can enter my Nanhua blessed land to reincarnate. Those who have reincarnated can give a few treasures to their teachers and disciples. What do you think?" Wei Zihong shook his head. "It is not enough." Huang Ci clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Then what do you want?" Wei Zihong said, "This Wei has come to an agreement with Bu Pavilion and a few fellow Taoists. As long as your sect can compensate us with pellet jade, we will immediately release them." Huang Ci was a little unhappy. Could it be that fellow Taoist thinks that these junior cultivators are worth so many pill jades? Wei Zihong smiled and said, "A great cultivator who cultivated a Dharmakaya and several fellow Yuaning Taoists, are they not worth these elixir jades?" Huang Xineng looked at him for a moment and knew that this matter could not be settled. However, he also understood that his family's visit this time was just a formality. It all depended on the two Taoist grotto heavens. At this time, Huang Yugong said, "Zhenren Zhang, let's not talk too much about this matter. Since you and my disciples are involved in this matter, then as a teacher, I'm afraid we can't really stay out of it. I have a suggestion. Why don't you and I have a duel to determine the winner and loser? If you win, fellow Taoist, I'll be able to settle this dispute. Just take the elixir jades that you need. If I win, I hope that your disciple will release the hostage and not interfere with the matters of the Bu Pavilion in the future." With Yu Xiao and the other factions pushing from behind, even if Qinsong School really gave in today, they would not be able to do anything. He had to find an excuse to fight with his opponent. He originally thought that his clan had no chance of winning, but now that he had a few more treasures by his side, and after a night of studying, his confidence had increased greatly. Zhang Yan laughed and said, "All the sects are here to congratulate Yuling Zhenren for ascending to another world. If the two of us fight, I'm afraid we'll disturb the master of this place." But Yuling Zhenren said, "It's fine. Before I ascend, if I'm lucky enough to see the divine arts of the two sects, I won't have any regrets." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since Zhenren Yuling says so and Taoist Brother Huang is interested, I will accompany you. When does Taoist Brother Huang want to set the battle?" Huang Yugong thought for a while and looked over, saying, "Sect Master Yuling will ascend the day after tomorrow. How about we set the battle tomorrow?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "All right, I will definitely see your sect's divine arts tomorrow." At this moment, a disciple of Mount Li walked in and bowed, saying, "Sect Master, Yuan Yang sect's Zhenren Wu is here." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Zhenren has guests, then we'll take our leave first." Huang Yugong also stood up and said goodbye. Zhenren Yuling also stood up and said, "Take care, both of you. Tonight, I'll use the spiritual opportunity of the formation to cover the Dipper Palace and Changling Palace. Both of you just need to meditate, no one will come and disturb you." The news of the battle between Huang Yugong and Zhang Yan quickly reached the ears of Pang Yunxiang and Wu Wei. When they heard about it, they immediately rushed to the Dipper Palace. After seeing Zhang Yan, Zhenren Pang said in a deep voice, "Huang Yugong knows that after the battle between Zhenren Yan and Zhenren Zhongzhu, his cultivation hasn't recovered yet. Yet, he wants to fight Zhenren at this time. This battle is really against morality. Wu Wei said in a deep voice, Huang Yugong is not a person who likes to fight. This battle is instigated by Yuxiao sect, so they will definitely make a move. When Zhenren enters the battle, you must be careful. Zhang Yan said, Don't worry, both of you. I know what I'm doing. Even if Zhenren Huang's cultivation is profound, it won't be easy for him to defeat I. Wu Wei and Pang both nodded. Even if Huang Yugong had the help of Yuxiao sect, he couldn't improve his battle power in a short period of time. He could only rely on treasures to make up for his shortcomings. On the other hand, Zhang Yan had the true killing sword in his hand, his mana was strong, and he had defeated Yan Chongqing before. However, after this battle, his cultivation would probably suffer a lot. If he wanted to cultivate to the second level, he would have to delay for a long time. On the second morning, the temples of all the sects were lit up, and there were streams of clear qi flowing into the sky. Yuan Yang sect's Zhenren Wu was about to go up to watch the battle. A few disciples came up and asked carefully, Zhenren, can you bring us up to watch? Zhenren Wu paused. She thought for a while and said, All right, this is a rare opportunity. All of you, come up to my golden boat. The few disciples were overjoyed. The people of paradise rarely fought each other, and it was even more rare to see them fighting each other. When they get back, they could boast about it for a while. Wu Zhenren picked a few of her favorite disciples to board the golden ship. She then urged her mana and flew towards the sky, steadily breaking through the 3 layers of Gangyun. Only then did she stop and said, A slight movement of the Gangyun here can take your lives. All of you must remember, no matter what you see later on, you must not leave this golden ship. The 5 disciples said in unison, Yes, Zhenren. Just as everyone went up to the sky, waiting for the battle between Zhang Yan and Huang Yugong. Outside of Li Mountain sect, there was a ray of sword gleam. From afar, it looked like a thin ray. However, as it got closer, it could be seen that the ray of sword gleam was thousands of miles long, as though it was cutting a line in the sky. It arrived at the mountain gate. The ray of sword gleam spun and turned into a white-browed, white-bearded, skinny Daoren. It was Elder Shui, who had met Zhang Yan once. He did not bring a single disciple and floated here alone. Li Mountain's head disciple, Shen Zixin, saw Zhenren Shaoqing's arrival and quickly went out to welcome him. When Elder Shui arrived at Li Mountain sect's mountain gate, he asked curiously, When I came here, I saw clear air in the sky. Isn't there still one more day before Zhenren Yuling's ascension ceremony? Why are all the Zhenrens in the sky? Shen Zixin said, Elder Shui is late by 1 day. I did not know that today, Zhenren Huang of South Hua sect and Zhenren Zhang of Qinsong school are fighting. My master was the witness, so all the Zhenrens are. Before she could finish her sentence, she saw a sword flying straight up. With a loud rumble, it split open the astral clouds and disappeared. Elder Shui hurried up to the sky. Previously, during the battle between Zhang Yan and Yan Chongqing, he could not see it with his own eyes and was very regretful. He did not expect to get another chance this time. In the blink of an eye, he was outside the 3rd heaven. He looked up and saw that the battle had not started. He stroked his beard and said, Luckily, I did not miss the time. According to etiquette, he should have gone forward to greet the owner of this place, Zhenren Yuling. However, at this moment, he was excited and had long thrown this to the back of his mind. At this moment, Huang Yugong and Zhang Yan stood opposite each other in the sky. Around them stood the Zhenrens of the various sects, while Zhenren Yuling sat on a golden raft and occupied a high spot. Huang Yugong sighed and said, Zhenren Zhang. This time, I did not want to make things difficult for you. However, now that things have come to this, I have no choice. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Zhenren Huang entered the Tao long before I. This time, being able to fight with Zhenren, I should be able to benefit greatly. He stretched out his hand and gestured, Please. Huang Yugong looked at him and cupped his hands before retreating. Very quickly, there was a distance between them. Zhang Yan also rode the wind and clouds and retreated. All the Zhenren of the cave heavens were shocked. Most of them had never fought with their peers. Even when they sparred with their peers, They only fought with their clones. They were not afraid that their cultivation would be damaged, so they usually stopped early. This time, they were fortunate enough to witness the battle between the two, which was beneficial to their sections. After Huang Yugong arrived in the distance, he waved his sleeves, and countless streams of red and yellow qi flew out from his body. In the middle of this qi whirlpool, there was a long and drawn-out cry that shook everyone present. When they turned their eyes to look, they saw that Huang Yugong had actually transformed into a 10,000 feet tall prung bird. He spread out a pair of cloud wings, and with just a lift of the wind, the clouds in the third layer of heaven were actually flapped, creating a huge whirlpool. The disciples of Yuan Yang who were watching the battle exclaimed, "Dharma, it's the grotto heaven Dharma." Pung bird? Zhenren of Shi's eyes flashed, and he thought to himself, so this is what fellow Taoist Huang is really using qi to manifest. Usually, I only see him in the form of a green crane. This time, when he is fighting against Zhang Yan, he must be showing his true strength. The Yuanying cultivators of Nanhua sect could use rare birds and strange beasts to aid in battle, but it was impossible for them to improve their cultivation to the next level. Not to mention the fact that they could not raise a great demon that was comparable to a grotto heaven cultivator. Even if they could, the spirit cave of Nanhua sect could not afford it. At this stage, there were only 3 methods. The first was to combine the Dharma body with the demon body and take over the demon's body. However, Nanhua sect was a Xianmen branch after all. Since the founding of the sect, no one had done such a thing. The second method was to use the spirit demon's soul essence for their own use, transforming it into qi to manifest, and borrowing its supernatural power. As for the third method, it was to take an item from a strange beast, preferably the blood essence, bone, and feather. Using it to visualize, when one's cultivation reached a high level, one could manifest it in the form of a Dharma image. The more items from the target's body, the more realistic the visualization would be, and the stronger the supernatural power manifested would be. Huang Yu's Dharma image was aided by the blood essence of the spirit rock that guarded the sect in the mountain gate. The rock let out a long cry and flapped its wings. Instantly, wind and thunder were born from its wings, pouring down like rain. Zhang Yan stood motionlessly with his hands behind his back. A strand of chaotic profound qi suddenly surged out from his body. It was indistinct, obscure, and unfathomable, and filled the heavens and the earth. After that, countless bolts of purple lightning surged out from his sea of energy and struck straight up. When they collided head-on, countless sounds of explosions actually resounded out. The astral clouds within 5,000 kilometers of the third layer of heaven were actually completely torn apart. His spirit spread out and his spirit soared explosively. Even the clouds in the fourth layer of heaven were affected, causing the 7-colored astral sand in the sky to swirl and dance about, filling the entire sky with brilliance. The few Yuan Yang martial school's disciples couldn't believe what they were seeing, and their eyes were filled with fear. It wasn't hard for them to sense that even a little bit of this power would be able to crush them into pieces. Spiritual Master Wu said calmly, "When a cultivator reaches the grotto heaven realm, he has the ability to shatter the continent. However, these two are still restraining themselves. Just now, they can only be regarded as a greeting and have not shown their true power." A figure appeared in the Xian Qi in the sky. Zhang Yan's figure emerged from within and looked at the spirit rock. In all fairness, there was no conflict between him and Huang Yugong. However, since Huang Yugong was standing opposite of Qinsong School, they were destined to be rivals in the future. This was a rare opportunity. If he could kill Huang Yugong here, when the tribulation came, he would be able to make Huang Yugong less powerful. However, if he directly took out the killing sword, he might be able to force Huang Yugong into a disadvantageous position. However, once Huang Yugong sensed the danger, he would probably hide in his own grotto heaven, or simply admit defeat. However, when a cultivator of the grotto heaven was at his peak, it would only take him a moment to hide in his grotto heaven. However, if he consumed too much of his power, it would only take him a few breaths' time. This short period of time was his chance. Therefore, the most appropriate method was to fight with Huang Yugong first. When Huang Yugong's power was mostly depleted, he would then use his sword to kill. On Huang Yugong's side, when the sound of wind and lightning dissipated, he flapped his wings again. Yellow qi floated on his body, and suddenly, hundreds of yellow clouds flew out. Then, there was the sound of a dragon's roar. Thousands of Jiao dragons rushed out from the clouds. These Jiao dragons were only manifested by the spirit, but their ability was not inferior to a real Jiao dragon. However, just as he moved forward, the Xian Qi in front of him opened up, and from it, a large yellow hand that could hold up the sky and catch the sun stretched out. With a horizontal slap, all the Jiao dragons exploded. The sky was filled with a rain of blood, broken scales, broken limbs, and broken bodies. Mysterious yellow dragon capturing hand? Huang Yugong snorted and said, "This should be the Tao technique that Tao Zhenhong, the abandoned disciple, evolved from the heavenly crane grab." However, he knew that it was useless. This kind of technique was ordinary, but in Zhang Yan's hands, because of his unparalleled power, it could produce such great power. If it was someone else, they would not be able to use this kind of ability. Seeing that after the big hand smashed the Jiao dragons, it reached towards the sky, he did not want to fight it head-on. He leaped up and spread his wings to evade, and then took the opportunity to sprinkle down a splash of thunder fire. However, Zhang Yan had already formed his cave for several decades. He cultivated day and night in the Duzhen Hall, and was no longer the same as when he first formed it. The mysterious yellow hand that was formed at this moment was really too big. When the thunder fire exploded, it was only slightly damaged, not even half a finger was damaged. The damaged area was instantly filled up by the rolling yellow smoke. Huang Yugong saw that he could not move the hand, and could not help but be shocked. He once again rode the wind and flew up. In his mind, he was thinking if he should take out his magical weapon. However, the fight had not even lasted for a moment. If he used it now, it would be difficult for him in the future. Zhang Yan would not wait for him to make a move. He made a gesture in his Xian Qi, and from the chaotic underworld Qi Si, another big hand actually grew out and reached towards the sky. In a split second, the two mysterious yellow hands worked together and grabbed towards the sky. Floating astronomy. Chapter 1063. After dodging a few times, the rock in the sky suddenly screeched. Not only did it stop dodging, it slapped one of the hands with its wings, causing the 5 fingers to crumble and turn into yellow smoke. Then, with a whistling sound, he closed his wings and swooped down. His claws collided with the other large hand, and with a rumble, the entire hand was torn apart. Then he flapped his wings again, and wind and lightning rained down, blasting apart the damaged large hand, causing it to explode into pieces. The rock had a strong body and sharp claws. Even without using the wind and thunder technique, it could still fight in close combat. Although Huang Yugong had transformed into a rock, he had achieved success in the Qi path. He wouldn't have thought about this before, but he was a Taoist master after all. In the past, he was worried about his cultivation and never used his full strength to fight with others. Now that he had completely let go, and in just a few moments, he understood how to use his true strength. Zhang Yan looked at it indifferently, and the scattered yellow smoke gathered again. In just a moment, the hand was as good as new. As long as his mana wasn't exhausted, breaking the hand would be useless. With just a thought, he could reconstruct it. Right now, he wasn't in a hurry to use his technique, as long as he could slowly wear down his opponent's vitality. Huang Yugong rode on the rock and tore the Xian Huang hand several times. However, the hands separated and reunited. Seeing that it was useless, he understood that unless he used up all his mana, he would just end up in a stalemate. Thus, he flapped his wings and 2 balls of yellow gas flew out from his dharma. They turned and turned into 2 heavenly cranes. Each of them flew and pecked at one of the hands, temporarily restraining it. Then he spread his wings and rushed down towards the boundless Xian Qi. Zhang Yan didn't move, but the Xian Qi of the chaotic Xian Qi rumbled and flashed, as if it was nurturing lightning. The rock felt danger and flew higher, escaping from the danger zone. It circled above and scattered wind and thunder from time to time. It looked like it would pounce down if it saw an opportunity. Zhang Yan's experience in fighting techniques was above Huang Yugong's, so it wasn't hard to see his intention. The two heavenly cranes were just guided by their essence and only needed to use a little mana. As for the Shen Huang hand, it was huge, and when it gathered and dispersed, it consumed a lot of mana. If this continued, from a normal point of view, he would naturally be at a disadvantage. Thus, his opponent would rather remain in a stalemate. He smiled and raised his hand. There was a buzzing sound, and countless fist-sized ink-black water droplets rose from the ground. They slowly rose into the sky and hovered there motionlessly. More and more droplets came out of the water droplets. Huang Yugong glanced over. He thought, could it be the Xianming heavy water? The reason why he recognized the origin of this water was because when Sun Jian became a Dharma adept, he had a fierce battle with Chu Yu of the Carp tribe. Although he did not defeat his opponent, he managed to force him to never show his face again. Ever since that battle, the image of the floating sky Qi Si became famous throughout the world, and the Xianming heavy water was also known to the world. However, Zhang Yan's heavy water, after decades of refinement, was not only very different from what Sun Jinren used, it was also very different from when he fought against Yan Changxing. It was also very different. Huang Yugong saw the droplets of heavy water floating in the sky, as if there was no end to it. At this rate, it would not be difficult for it to cover the entire area. Although he did not know what it was going to do, he did not dare to let his opponent set it up so recklessly. The peng flapped its wings and let out a long cry. It actually released thousands of balls of yellow gas. Every ball of gas that flew out turned into a spiritual bird. In a short while, there were red cranes, green birds, white swallows, red egrets, black sparrows, golden gulls, brown cuckoo, mantled geese, iron-winged eagles, spotted falcons, scissor-tailed falcons, crested pheasants, buluo doves, fei, bai yen, elephant snakes, jingwei, yu yen, red yen and many other strange birds flew out one after another. The sound of its wings flapping filled the air. Under the control of its magic power, it flew forward. Under the control of their mana, they gathered together and attacked downwards. Following the strange sounds, Wu Jinren's expression changed slightly. She turned around and shouted, "All of you, quickly close your 5 senses and 7 apertures." She raised her hand and with a wave, the golden boat was covered with a layer of golden light. But even though she had taken care of them, a few of the disciples who heard the birds cry went into a trance. Some danced, some screamed crazily, some cried and laughed, as if they had gone mad. Wu Jinren shook her head. With a snap of her fingers, all the disciples who had lost control fell to the ground and fell asleep. When Zhang Yan saw thousands of spiritual birds attacking, he had a thought. The lightning that had been accumulating in his qi for a long time was released with a rumble. But suddenly, a strange bird that looked like a gull but not a gull suddenly appeared among the flock of birds. It had bright feathers and rushed forward. With a sweet chirp, all the lightning that was rushing towards him disappeared. When Nanhua cultivators reached the Grotto Heaven realm, they could use mana to create thousands of kinds of birds and beasts at will. Among them, there were some that were created by the soul and some that were visualized by the feathers. Their magical powers were also different. Some could confuse people's minds, some could control wind and fire, some could rebuke lightning, and some could create water and fog. At this time, they were not afraid of ordinary methods at all. When Zhang Yan saw that his momentum did not decrease, he smiled and waved his sleeve. Dozens of sharp golden lights flew out, and when they flew in the air, they made a dull sound of thunder. Because these rays of light were incomparably fast, a hawk was unable to react in time and was brushed by one of the rays of light. It was immediately sliced into 2. Then, even more golden rays of light rushed over and circled around these spirit birds. Unexpectedly, not a single one of them was able to contend against these rays of light. Not long after, all of them were sliced into pieces, and only a rain of blood filled the sky. After wiping out the flock of birds in an instant, the golden rays flew back and returned to Zhang Yan's side, floating in the air. At first, everyone thought that he was controlling the flying swords, but when they looked again, they saw that they were actually flying talismans. However, there were many runes on them, and even when they glanced over them, they felt that they were profound and difficult to decipher. When Huang Yu saw it, he was shocked. Is this the golden light sword talisman that Xinchong used? When Xinchong was still alive, he did not have a good relationship with Nanhua sect. Because the two sects were not far from each other, this sword talisman was created to deal with spiritual birds. At that time, most of the disciples of Guangyuan sect knew this move. Because no one in the Grotto Heaven sect was Xinchong's opponent, and the disciples were afraid that their strange beasts would be killed, they could only take a detour when they saw the cultivators of this sect. Because of his experience in his early years, Zhang Yan knew how to create this sword talisman. But now that he was a spiritual master of Grotto Heaven sect, he would not stick to the old ways, and the sword talisman he used was different from Guangyuan sects. The sword talisman that Xinchong used was refined with the blood of fierce beasts in the world, and then carved runes on it. It was as sharp as a flying sword, but like a candle, once it was activated, it would be used up in a short period of time. At the time when Xinchong had the most sword talisman, he only had a dozen or so sword talismans on him. As for Zhang Yan's sword talisman, he used the precious materials of the sect to create it, so he did not need to do it himself. As the master of Duzhen Hall, he only needed to pass down the method of creating the talisman, and Zi Guang, Fang Qin, and Lingji Courtyard would do it for him. But after the talisman was created, he still needed to use his own mana to write the runes, and then he ordered Mo Jiao to use the Dan fire to refine it for dozens of years. Its power was stronger than what Xinchong used in the past. He had more than 300 of these talisman swords in his hands, and when he used them with his mana, he could easily kill the spirit essence that was formed from qi. However, after this battle, they would all turn into ashes and fly away, and not a single one would be left. Huang Yu saw that the flock of birds was easily destroyed by him, and he wanted to use another method. But at this time, he heard a sad cry, and he looked over. A heavenly crane accidentally collided with a drop of heavy water in the air, but it seemed to have collided with something extremely solid. In an instant, one of its legs was broken, but the drop of water did not move at all, as if it was frozen in midair. Only then did he suddenly realize that within 10,000 miles, other than the place where the two of them were fighting, the rest of the places were filled with this kind of black water. It could be said that it blocked a lot of space to fly and move, causing the heavenly crane to be entangled with the mysterious yellow big hand in close combat. No wonder it would accidentally collide with the heavy water. But this heavy water was so strange, and he could see that something was wrong, so he did not bother with Zhang Yan anymore, and hurriedly fanned the wind and thunder, and attacked in one direction. He wanted to break through a passage, escape to a faraway place, and fight again in a different place. But when the lightning and wind hit the heavy water, it only moved a little, and it looked like it had become a little smaller. Not even a drop was broken. Huang Yu's heart trembled. This water was not only hard to break, it was still being produced. It would not be long before he was forced into a corner, and the Peng's biggest advantage of flying in the sky would be destroyed. And he did not need to think too much to guess that Zhang Yan had made such a big formation, and it was not just for show. He must have a backup plan. At this time, if he did not use a treasure, he would probably fall into the opponent's trap. So he no longer hesitated, and the Peng opened its mouth to spit out a jade box. When it reached the outside, it stopped moving. When the box's cover was opened, a white light flashed out, and in an instant, it stretched for thousands of miles. Once it came out, it instantly swept across the horizon, and everywhere it passed, the mysterious underworld heavy water turned into nothingness. Spiritual Master Pang, who was watching the battle from the outside, tensed up and took 2 steps forward, saying, "Spiritual Master Wu, do you think this is Yu Xiao School's two-phase disillusionment divine light?" Wu Wei's expression was solemn, and he said, "Spiritual Master Pang is right, this should be it." This light was made by the cultivators of Yu Xiao School's Grotto Heaven, who used a secret technique to receive the sun, moon, and stars, and then refined it with external medicine. Normally, it would take at least 100 to 200 years to gather this light, and it could break through all obstacles in an instant, and it could even destroy the enemy's technique. In terms of power, It was above the Shunwei star thunder beat. Spiritual Master Pang said in a low voice, "This battle is indeed caused by Yuxiao school." Wu Wei said, "Spiritual Master Zhang should be on guard. Although this disillusionment divine light is powerful, it can only be used a few times." Spiritual Master Pang's brows furrowed. Even if it could only be used a few times, it would cause great damage. If he did not handle it well, his vitality would be greatly damaged. Huang Yugong saw that there was a clear path in front of him, so he flapped his wings and was about to escape. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan extended his hand and made a grabbing motion in the air. The rock's gigantic body instantly shuddered as if it was being suppressed by a vast amount of mana. It was unable to move. Huang Yugong immediately reacted, and he said in shock, "5 elements escape technique?" Zhang Yan pointed once more, and all the sword talismans by his side swiftly transformed into golden lights that flew out, and they ceaselessly slashed onto the rock's body. In next to no time, the rock was slashed to the point its flesh and blood splattered while its feathers fell down. Huang Yugong's spiritual rock form was visualized using his blood essence. Not only was it connected to his spirit, but it was also like a real rock both inside and out. It was no different from a body of flesh and blood. Now that it was cut, although it could not hurt his real body, the pain was unbearable, and his mana was constantly being worn down. How could he be willing to be hurt for nothing? He used all his mana to struggle, and his body instantly became light. He was about to fly away, but after flying for a few dozen miles, he felt his body sink again. He was actually caught by the 5 elements escape technique again. At this moment, the golden light behind him caught up again, and more than 300 sword talismans slashed down one after another. Every time, blood splattered, and the rock screeched endlessly. However, every time it tried to use its supernatural power to fly away, it would be caught by the 5 elements escape technique. Zhang Yan kept using his supernatural power to suppress his opponent, and everyone watching was stunned. Most of the supernatural powers in Qinsong School were based on the 5 elements. Once a cultivator reached the grotto heaven, his supernatural power could be used to its greatest extent, and the consumption of mana was minimal. There were some strange secret techniques that were useful in the Yuanying state, but it was usually difficult to shake the opponent's Dharma form in the grotto heaven state. For supernatural powers like the 5 elements escape technique, not only did it need to condense the chi of the 5 elements, but it also required a lot of mana to use. However, Zhang Yan was different. He used the 5 elements mysterious technique as his foundation, and it could be said that it was a combination of Tao and Dharma. Therefore, he had no qualms when using this supernatural power. However, the spectators didn't understand the reasoning behind this. Wu Yunbi was both shocked and confused. She said, "I don't know what Zhang Yan is thinking. He actually doesn't cherish his mana. Even if he wins against Taoist Huang, his cultivation will suffer a great loss." Zhou Ruiying said, "Isn't this exactly what we want?" Wu Yunbi shook her head and said, "That's not the case. Right now, Zhang Yan is the Qinsong School's Hall Master Duzhen, and he also has great treasures on him. I suspect that he has a treasure like the unobstructed heart plate that can borrow mana. That's why he dares to do this again." Zhou Ruiying was startled, and he said with a frown, "That's not impossible. However, even if that's the case, these treasures must have their limits. I don't believe that they can last longer than the treasures refined by Heaven Mending Pavilion. As long as Dao Friend Huang is willing to delay the battle, I don't believe that he can't exhaust his cultivation." Wu Yunbi said, "That will depend on spiritual master Huang's will." Zhou Ruiying took a look and snorted and said, "Dao Friend Huang's own methods don't count, but he has the treasures of the 4 of us on him. If he still can't hold on, then he has cultivated for so many years in vain." At this moment, Huang Yugong was also a bit unable to hold on under the siege of the sword talismans. He saw that a lot of the heavy water flew out again, as if it wanted to seal up the path that he had just opened up just now. He didn't care about hiding anymore, and after the jade box, he spat out a mouthful of black gas. This item was illuminated by the heavenly sun, and its flames were immediately stripped away, and it turned into a jade talisman tablet. It was exquisite and smooth, and it glowed with rainbow light. As soon as it came out, it spun around him. Sometimes it turned into hundreds, and sometimes it turned into one. Every time, it was able to block the path of the sword talisman. This treasure's name was Eternal Light Wall, and it was a defensive treasure. When the sword talisman slashed upwards, it either bounced off or it exploded in the air. Zhang Yan focused his eyes and felt that Huang Yugong's control of this treasure was not smooth, and there was still a trace of obstruction. Thus, he deduced that it was very likely that this was not the opponent's, and that the disillusionment divine light was borrowed by Yu Xiao and the others. Thinking about this, his eyes slightly flickered. If he could break this treasure in this battle, then he could also reduce the opponent's strength. Chapter 1064. Seeing that Huang Yugong was blocked by the Eternal Light Wall, Zhang Yan raised his hand and cast a spell. The countless drops of Xianming heavy water that had been suspended in the air all trembled and gave off a buzzing sound, causing the entire region within 10,000 miles to be filled with this deep sound. This presence was extremely oppressive, and even the spectators felt their hearts palpitate. Zhou Ruiying's expression changed slightly and he said, "Senior Brother Wu, can you tell what kind of divine art this is?" Wu Yunbi pondered for a moment and said, "It is rumored that Zhang Yan had once studied half of the Billowing Cloud's secret manual. This technique was born from it, but he himself added some variations." Zhenren Yuling looked at the humming Xianming heavy water, and his expression became slightly solemn. She could sense the vast mana contained in the drops of heavy water. She did not doubt that if these ink beads accidentally fell into the East Hua continent, they could instantly collapse half of the continent. Out of caution, she cast a spell, and the Lishan Sect's mountain formation immediately formed a boundless array qi that covered the mountain. At this moment, Zhang Yan felt that he had accumulated enough power. He pointed at his opponent, and countless drops of heavy water seemed to be pulled in one direction. One drop after another, they smashed towards the body of the Peng at an incredible speed. Huang Yugong was shocked and he thought, "Not good." Under his control, the Eternal Light Jade Wall buzzed and transformed into layers of jade bricks. They were like city walls, surrounding the body of the Peng. The heavy water of the heavens smashed into the formation wall without any hesitation. Under such attacks, the talisman was smashed into pieces and then reformed. However, compared to the practically boundless Netherism heavy water, its recovery effect was slightly weaker in the end, and it was unable to completely block off all directions. Quite a bit of heavy water penetrated through the barrier and heavily smashed onto the rock's body, piercing numerous bloody holes. It stayed in the water, and the Xianming water continued to wear down its mana and vital energy. As for the two heavenly cranes that were used to restrain the Xianhuang hands, they were unable to attend to them at this moment. Before they could even make a turn, they were smashed into pieces by the heavy water in midair. Zhang Yan wasn't even looking at the rock Dharma idol. Instead, he was looking at the Eternal Light Jade Disc. The magical item could transform into tens of thousands of images, but in his eyes, there was only one dot of starlight dancing in the sky. He could tell. That starlight was where the essence of the magic treasure resided, and also where the true spirit resided. As long as the source was not destroyed, no matter how many times the magic treasure was destroyed, it would not be damaged in the slightest, unless it was directly struck. However, this magic treasure isn't without flaws. It can only block 90% of the attacks, and there are still a few that charge in. Perhaps it's because the treasure doesn't belong to them and they can't use it as they wish. That's why it's like this. If we can make use of it, we might be able to do something. At this moment, Huang Yugong was surrounded by the heavy water. His dharma was continuously being worn down. Even though he looked to be in a sorry state, up until now, his mana was still full, just like when they first fought. This was because he had the open heart plate on him. This magic treasure was amazing, and all the mana he used up until now was borrowed from the plate for his own use. It was extremely rare. There seemed to be a deep pool within the plate, and who knew how much mana it had gathered. Up until now, there were no signs of it drying up. But at this moment he suddenly heard a voice in his heart, "Shinren, if we continue to fight like this, I will have to pay a heavy price. But that's fine. As long as you double the amount of pill jades I have, it's not like I can't pay." Huang Yugong was shocked when he heard this, but he understood that it was no wonder the true spirit of the magic treasure asked them for pill jades. Without these pill jades, how would they be able to support so much consumption? He said, "Just do your best, I will give it to you later." After comforting the true spirit of the magic treasure, he also realized that if he didn't think of a way to break out, once the open heart plate cut off his mana, his cultivation would be damaged. But the 5 elements escape technique continued to restrict his upper body. He wanted to rush out, but he didn't have the strength to do so. He realized that the only way was to turn around and deal with Zhang Yan. He wanted to launch a series of attacks to suppress him, and then he would have a chance to find a way out. Although the power of the 2-phase disillusionment godlight is great, there is a limit to the number of times I can use it. Just now, if I use it, Zhang Yan will most likely be on guard. It's not good to use it now, so I can only use that item. At this point he had already exposed 2 treasures, and now he was going to take out the third one. The rock opened its mouth and spat out a purple jade fruit seed. Using its mana, it brought with it a jade purple light that shot towards the Xianqi. Zhang Yan's eyebrows rose. Jade jasper purple sun seed? When he was in the Yuanying realm, he had fought with such a treasure a few times and knew that it was very powerful. Although it wasn't a killing true artifact, looking at its power, it wasn't much weaker. But if it was a cultivator from Taihao School who used it, he would be more serious. Huang Yugong was a south flower cultivator and wasn't the owner of this treasure. It was impossible for him to use it as he wished. Using this item didn't require any mana, as long as the person who used it used their divine intent. Even if he could suppress it, it would be a waste of his divine intent. So he didn't fight it head-on. He turned to the side, and the Xianqi under his feet parted, allowing the jade jasper purple sun seed to pass through. Then he raised his sleeves, and layers of chaotic Xianqi surged up and covered it. The moment the purple sun seed entered the Dharma idol, all directions were covered by layers of Xianqi. At that moment, a golden light came. With a slash, it cut off the divine intent that was attached to it. While Zhang Yan was busy dealing with the treasure seed, Huang Yugong used all his strength to break free of the divine intent that was restraining him. He flapped his wings, and they flew thousands of miles in an instant. He was completely out of the encirclement of the heavy water. Then, with a thought, he wanted to take back the treasure seed. But he summoned it several times, but it was useless. He knew it wasn't good, so he could only give up. Luckily, it helped him get out of his predicament, so it was worth it. Zhang Yan knew that the treasure seed was only here temporarily and hadn't been subdued yet. The original owner only needed to summon it and he could summon it back. But since it was in his hands, how could he let him take it back so easily? With the guidance of his divine will, he released the golden element true light once again and slashed at the object one after another. After a few breaths, the blood essence imprint within it gradually faded. Spiritual Master Shi was sitting on a leaf, watching the battle. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. The connection between him and the jade jasper purple sun seed was getting weaker and weaker. He suddenly stood up and stared at the battlefield. The purple sun seed was guided by its owner. He immediately rushed out of the formation. However, at this time, a watercolored brilliance rushed out from the chaos profound chi. It was thousands of feet long, and it really seemed like a flood rushing over. There was the sound of a monstrous tide. With just a sweep, it sucked him in, and the brilliance flashed. Then, it disappeared without a trace. Spiritual Master Shi made a sound of surprise. He felt that the connection between his mind and the treasure seed was completely severed. His face couldn't help but sink. He thought to himself, Zhang Yan used his divine intent to temporarily suppress the treasure seed. I have refined this treasure seed for thousands of years, and the blood mark has long become one with it. Even if I take it, I can't use it for myself. But the treasure of my sect can't be left outside. I have to get it back eventually. After the battle is over, I can only look for Zhang Yan to discuss it and ask for it back. Zhang Yan took the jade jasper purple sun seed. He looked up and saw that Huang Yugong had escaped from the encirclement of the heavy water. He activated his divine intent and moved forward. At this moment, it wasn't impossible for him to chase, but it was pointless. The rock's flying speed wasn't any lower than his movement technique. If he just dodged, he would be in a long period of chasing. On the surface, it didn't look like a life and death battle. The goal was just to decide who won and who lost. Even if he fell behind, the other party would come back to find him sooner or later. Why not just wait for him to tire himself out? As expected, not long later, the rock turned back and challenged him to a fight. However, this time it learned its lesson. Every time the Xianming heavy water floated out, it would immediately flap its wings and flee. It wouldn't stay in one place for long. At the same time, it summoned lightning and wind. It released rare beasts, and every time it faced danger, it would use the two-aspect illusionary godlight to help it out. He had completely given up on the path of a head-on battle, and had instead chosen to engage in guerrilla warfare. Zhang Yan's original intention was to waste his opponent's spiritual energy. As for what kind of strategy he used, he didn't care much. He took it all on. Just like that, the two sides fought back and forth for almost an hour. Zhou Ruing was very satisfied as she said, "Yellow Sage is doing well. If this goes on, as long as we can hold on for a few more hours, Zhang Yan's transcendence energy will definitely be greatly damaged, and we will have achieved our goal." Wu Yunbi looked back and forth between the two sides and sighed. Zhang Yan's spiritual energy is really deep. Even now, he doesn't show any signs of fear. Zhou Ruiying laughed coldly. "It is like that now, but if we continue to fight, he might not be able to. After a while, let's see if he can still be so relaxed." Wu Yunbi thought about it and said, "At that time, Zhang Yan will definitely take the initiative to attack. However, as long as Huang Zhenren can see through it and avoid it, there might be a chance of winning this battle." As the fight went on, Zhang Yan noticed something strange. Up until now, Huang Yugong had been hit by his divine arts at least 100 times. His prung body was broken and healed and broken again. However, his aura was only slightly weakened. Compared to the beginning, he didn't lose much. With the opponent's spiritual energy, this was very unreasonable. There must be some treasure supporting him. His eyes flickered slightly. Huang Yugong was still so calm at this moment, that meant that he still had enough strength. As such, according to the current situation, it was difficult for him to predict how long this battle would last. If it dragged until the day of Yu Lingzhenren's ascension, then no matter who won or lost, it would have to stop. If that was the case, then using the original slow way to wear him down was no longer feasible. However, in a battle of spiritual energy, the battle situation was ever-changing. It was impossible to go according to one's plan. Even if there were any accidents, it was normal. Now that he realized something was wrong, he immediately changed his strategy. Zhang Yan was also decisive. He immediately stretched out his hand and pointed towards the sky. A strand of purple qi flew up into the sky and dispersed at an extremely fast speed. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, purple clouds quickly surged and lightning gradually appeared. Purple cloud thunder? Huang Yugong realized that the situation was not good and immediately wanted to leave. However, with the formation that Zhang Yan made, he wouldn't let him escape so easily. He immediately used the 5 elements escape technique and forcefully slowed down Huang Yugong's escape speed. When he got rid of the spiritual energy, the sky was already filled with lightning snakes and lightning flashed. In the blink of an eye, it formed a net that covered the sky and trapped him inside. Once the purple cloud thunder net was formed, even the normal technique of movement would be useless. Moreover, there was the 5 elements escape technique on the side. He could only use brute force to break out. Not long after, there was a series of explosions in the sky and countless dense lightning bolts struck down. Huang Yugong couldn't retreat and could only use the eternal light wall again. In an instant, an unknown number of jade talisman appeared and blocked the incoming lightning bolts. At the same time, the consumption of his spiritual energy increased greatly. The open heart compass said in his heart, "Spiritual master, I can't do it anymore. I will have to rely on spiritual master to defend against the enemy. After the battle, don't forget about the core jade. As it said that, the compass quieted down and didn't borrow any more spiritual energy. Luckily, Huang Yugong didn't lose his vitality at the moment, so he could still defend with ease. Zhang Yan looked ahead and fixed his eyes on the rock. Seeing that it was still full of vigor, he decided to use a strange move. If he could succeed in one move, he would have a chance to kill this person. If not, the opponent would most likely escape. After thinking about it, he moved his mind and thousands of floating sword rays appeared behind him. When they gathered together, it was like a bright galaxy. He raised his sleeve and pointed forward. In the vault of heaven, in an instant, rays of sword aura spread out and wrapped around the lightning. They tore apart the atmosphere and spread for 1,000 miles, slashing straight ahead. When Huang Yugong saw this, he couldn't help but tremble and said in shock, "Killing true sword?" He knew that Zhang Yan was an expert in the art of flying swords, but he didn't expect that he had refined it into a killing true weapon. At this moment, he knew that he had no chance of winning. If he didn't retreat now, he might be killed here if he wasn't careful. He retracted the rock's dharma and returned to his original appearance. He used all his strength to drive the eternal light wall and made a hand sign. Countless small broken lights appeared all over his body and his body became faintly discernible. He was about to hide in the cave. However, at this moment, his body suddenly trembled. He was suppressed by a vast mana. He knew that it was the 5 elements escape technique. However, he wasn't in a hurry. After 2 or 3 breaths, he would be able to break free from the mana. With the eternal light jade talisman blocking in front of him, even a killing true weapon wouldn't be able to break in. By then, he would have already left. Although he had used up a lot of mana in the cave, even if he could come out again, he wouldn't be able to fight again. He had already lost this battle. However, he thought that since he had fought to this point, no one could say anything about him. Because there were thousands of sword rays and there was an overwhelming amount of lightning rays attacking at the same time, he could only use the eternal light wall to block the sword rays. He couldn't let a single ray in. As for some lightning rays, even if they leaked in, he didn't think it would be a problem. However, in a flash, he felt his body lighten. At this moment, there were many lightning bolts that had leaked in and were leaping towards his home. Just as he was about to ignore them and enter the heavenly abode, the dozens of lightning bolts suddenly lengthened and flashed past his body like light. He couldn't help but be shocked. He widened his eyes and revealed a look of disbelief. Then he let out a long sigh and said, Shu-Yi originally wanted to ascend to the heavens, but he didn't want to stay in the mortal world. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud rumble and his body collapsed. Chapter 1065. The Duke of Yellow Feather's Dharma body dispersed and a clear air filled the air. With a flash of brilliance, a jade plate and a feather flew out. At a glance, one could tell that they were real treasures. However, under the hail-like thunderbolts, they seemed to be flustered. Zhang Yan gently flicked his sleeve, and a stream of water light descended from the sky. With a whoosh, the 2 items were sucked into it. Although he had killed his opponent, he didn't stop. With a point of his finger, countless rays of sword light gathered and chased after the eternal light wall. How rare was a defensive treasure? In the hands of a paradise cultivator, it could increase his combat ability. Just now, without this treasure, how could Huang Yu last so long under his attacks? Since it was in front of him, he couldn't let it go. He might as well take this opportunity to destroy it. With the death of its user, the eternal light wall was about to return to its original owner, but it didn't think that the thousands of rays of sword light in the sky would turn and attack it. Within the eternal light wall, a white-robed Taoist with sword-like eyebrows appeared. This was the true spirit of the treasure. When he saw this, he couldn't help but reveal a look of fear. How could he not know that Zhang Yan was going to attack him? He immediately called out, wanting to communicate with his master who was waiting outside. However, the purple sky thunder net hadn't been withdrawn yet, so he couldn't break out. He could only defend first. Thus, he hid his body and transformed into thousands of jade talisman, while he himself transformed into a dot of starlight to move around and dodge. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. A true treasure that had no one controlling it, without the support of a cultivator's magic power, unless it was the clasping sun battleaxe or the dark north sword, how could it possibly fight against a cultivator of the paradise? He waved his hand, and a ray of green light swept across the sky. The eternal light wall couldn't dodge at all, and it was hit. In a split second, the green light climbed and spread, as if it was tightly entangled by countless branches and vines. The jade talismans that were separated from each other were also frozen in midair, and even the source of essence itself was no exception. What kind of technique is this? The eternal light true spirit was shocked and anxious, but how could it admit defeat so easily? Its body trembled, and thousands of jade brick talismans flew out. No matter how many came out, it would be useless. Because he couldn't support it, it didn't last long. It was already powerless. The true spirit had no choice but to reveal himself and explain, "Zhenren Zhang, I'm not a magic treasure of Zhenren Huang. I was originally used by the Taihao sect." Zhang Yan did not speak to him at all. With a thought, thousands of sword lights chopped down on the star. Even if it was a defensive true treasure, it couldn't withstand the attack of a true treasure's essence. The true spirit shouted, "Enlightened master, let me go. I'm willing to surrender." Zhang Yan acted as if he did not hear anything. Since the owner of the treasure could borrow this treasure, then there must be a way to take it back. Even if he really suppressed it, if it wasn't a true treasure that he refined himself, he wouldn't be able to control it as he wished during battle. That was why he didn't bother about it and just controlled the sword light to slash down. In just a few breaths of time, under the countless bolts of lightning and flying swords, the treasure was finally unable to hold on any longer. Amidst the explosion, a shrill and miserable cry was mixed with it, and it transformed into a ball of powder. It was a broken jade, and the spirit disappeared just like that. Wu Yunbi and the eternal light wall were connected by heart. Now that the treasure was broken, his expression instantly changed. His body also trembled. Zhou Ruiying saw this and couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Senior brother Wu?" Wu Yunbi took in a deep breath and said solemnly, "My treasure has been destroyed in the formation." Zhou Ruiying couldn't help but be shocked and said, "How did this happen?" She turned her head to look at the formation. The treasure was destroyed. What exactly happened there? Because the purple cloud heavenly thunder was born from within and outside. The vision was blocked, and lightning flashed inside. Dharma collided, messing up the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth. The people outside didn't know what was happening in the formation, and they could only slightly sense some changes, but they couldn't distinguish it clearly. Wu Yunbi was also heartbroken when his treasure was destroyed. His treasure was not passed down from his sect, but it was refined by his own family for more than 2,000 years before it gave birth to a true spirit. Many of his fighting methods were arranged around this treasure, and it could be said that once this treasure was gone, his battle power was reduced by more than half. However, he still quickly calmed down and said, "It's not impossible. Fellow Taoist Huang can't use this magic treasure as he wishes. If Zhang Yan blindly wants this magic treasure, he can also do it if he pays a certain price." Zhou Ruiying said, "Even the defensive treasure was destroyed. It must be an intense battle. I don't know how spiritual Master Huang is now." Wu Yunbi looked deeply at the purple lightning and said, "How exactly is it? We'll have to wait and see." Not long after, the lightning net that covered the sky gradually disappeared, and the situation inside was also revealed. The spectators couldn't help but look at it with rapt attention. In the vast sky, Zhang Yan stood alone in the sky. His sleeves fluttered, and Xian Qi circulated around him, but Huang Yugong was nowhere to be seen. Strange, where did fellow Huang go? Could it be that the winner and the loser have been decided? Who won and who lost? Spiritual Master Yuling looked around, and a complicated look appeared in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Don't look for him. Spiritual Master Huang is dead." What? How is that possible? Everyone present was shocked. Even though it was Spiritual Master Yuling who said it, they still didn't believe it. Huang Yugong was a second-stage elephant phase cultivator. Not to mention the eternal light jade annulus, even if he was really in danger, he could hide in the grotto heaven. How could he die here? Spiritual Master Yuling raised his hand and grabbed a ball of clear air. He pointed at it and sent it to where everyone was and said, "Fellow Taoists, just go and take a look." Everyone took it and looked at it. They were all in disbelief. This was the qi activity left behind by Spiritual Master Dong Tian after his dharma collapsed. They looked at each other, and all of them were silent. A Spiritual Master Dong Tian was killed right in front of them, and his spirit couldn't be seen either, so he must have been killed too. Even though there was still a bit of spirit left in the corporeal body that could be reincarnated, it was still inferior to the primordial spirit of a low-level cultivator. It was almost impossible for him to enter the path of Tao in the future. Zhou, Wu, and the others looked at Zhang Yan's figure in the sky, and their eyes were filled with fear and vigilance. Huang Yugong had their help, and he had 4 treasures in his hands, but he was still killed. This meant that if they were in his shoes, the result would be the same. Elder Shui let the clear air around his hand dissipate, and he said, what a pity that we couldn't see anything interesting." Huang Yugong was also useless, he couldn't even survive the lightning net. Bu Jingsu couldn't help but say, "Priest Shui, fellow Taoist Huang is already dead, why are you scolding him?" Elder Shui blew his beard, and he glared at him. "He's not immortal, so why cry in pain?" Bu Jingsu said helplessly, "This is too unreasonable." Elder Shui looked him up and down. He said, "Doran's hands are itching, why don't you come down and fight with me, old Bu?" Bu Jingsu admitted, "I'm not your opponent." Elder Shui shook his head and he said, "If you don't fight, how will you know?" He snorted, and suddenly his meaning became dull. With a wave of sword ray, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. Master Wu's beautiful eyes swept back and forth, and she said, "Let's go." She raised her hand. The golden boat slowly descended, and she said to the disciples behind her, "Remember, if you meet Zhao Yu's disciples outside, don't get into a fight with them unless it's necessary." The disciples all nodded. In their eyes, the grotto heaven cultivators were already at the peak of this world. At this stage of cultivation, no one could shake them. They didn't expect to see a grotto heaven spiritual master die in front of them. The impact was too great, and they still hadn't calmed down. Just now, Zhang Yan had learned a lot from the fight, so he wasn't in a hurry to go down. Instead, he stood in the air and comprehended. After a while, he opened his eyes and floated down from the clouds. From afar, he saw Master Yuling standing in the sky. Mana surged around him, and he was calming down the remnant astral currents. This was to calm the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. Otherwise, the aftermath of their fight would cause chaos in Li Mountain. Master Yuling saw him and said, "Master Zhang, you've put me in a difficult position." Zhang Yan smiled. "Since you allowed me to fight Huang Yugong, you must have expected this." "I'm afraid you've already expected this. Let's just say that our Yutsong sect owes you a favor." Master Yuling nodded slowly. Huang Yugong died in Li Mountain sect. It didn't matter when she was around, but once she left, Nanhua sect would come looking for trouble. By then, they would have to rely on Yu Xiao and Qinsong to protect them. However, Yu Xiao and Nanhua were standing together. In order to appease them, they might acquiesce to their actions. In that case, they could only rely on Qinsong's protection. Just as Zhang Yan said, she had foreseen this before the fight. However, this involved the fight between Yu Xiao and Qinsong, and she couldn't stop it. However, this promise was more reassuring than the marriage between the two sections. After today's fight, there wouldn't be many in the 9 continents who would dare to provoke Zhang Yan. At this moment, Master Shi suddenly spoke from afar. "Master Zhang, would you like to meet me later?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I will be waiting at the Spoon Fighting Palace." As he spoke, he floated down. Jinren Shi turned his head and saw Zhou and Wu looking at him. Without any explanation, he too turned into a breath of fresh air and descended from the sky. Zhou Ruiying said, "Master Shi wants to take back the jade jasper purple sun seed." Wu Yunbi nodded and said, "It concerns the sect's treasure, no wonder he is anxious." Zhou Ruing turned to look at Bu Jingsu and said, "Your sect's treasure also fell into Master Zhang's hands, but I don't see you in such a hurry." Bu Jingsu smiled bitterly and said, "I was hoping that Uncle Master Chang Exen would come back later." The two of them could not help but be startled. Then, they could not help but think that although Huang Yugong had lost, they could not forget the pill jade that was promised to be given to them. Moreover, they still had to think of a way to rescue the disciples who were imprisoned in the Jade Feather Pavilion. Thinking about this, their mood became even worse. Wu Yunbi sighed and said, "Fellow Huang's death is not a small matter. As for the remaining troublesome matters, we should return to the palace first and deal with them later." Zhang Yan had already returned to the Spoon Fighting Palace. Jing Yu came forward and bowed, saying, "Congratulations on your victorious return, master." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How do you know I won?" Jing Yu flattered him and said, "That Huang Yugong was only an elder of Nanhua sect, how could he be master's opponent? If it was Nanhua sect master, he might be able to fight with master." Zhang Yan smiled and walked to the cattail hassock and sat down. After a while, an attendant came in and said, "Reporting to Master Shi is here." Zhang Yan said, "Invite him in." Not long after, spiritual Master Shi walked in with a disciple. The two of them greeted each other and sat down in front of the hall. Master Shi said, "I am here for the Jade Jasper Purple Sun Seed. It is Taihao's treasure and cannot be lost outside. I hope Master Zhang can help me." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I have no intention of getting my hands on the precious treasure of your sect." He took out the seed from his sleeve and gave it to Master Shi, saying, "Fellow Taoist Shi, take it back." Master Shi did not expect him to be so easy to talk to, so he was slightly stunned. After thinking for a while, he took it and kept it in his sleeve carefully. He bowed and said, "Previously, Brother Yugong said that if he lost the battle, he was willing to exchange the elixir jade for the return of his disciple. I had a deep friendship with him, and now that he has passed away, I am sad. However, Nanhua sect does not have a fellow Taoist here, so I made the decision on his behalf." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "Then I will have to trouble you, fellow Taoist." Master Shi looked up and said, "My lost disciple is also willing to exchange the elixir jade." Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "I will inform Zihong later, instruct him to pass on the order to release the two families." Master Shi thanked him and signaled the disciple behind him to step forward. He took out a jade from his sleeve and placed it on the ground, saying, "Please keep it well, Master Zhang." The amount of pill jades contained within were far more than enough to exchange for a few disciples of the sect. It was even enough to redeem the treasured seed. However, since Zhang Yan was acting in a good manner regarding the matter of the treasured seed and did not purposely make things difficult for him, then he was not willing to take advantage of him. If not, he would lose face for his sect. As for the disciples of Yuxiao sect and Heaven Mending sect, he wanted to redeem them as well. However, after thinking about it, he did not think they would lower their heads so easily, so he gave up. After bidding farewell, he returned to his own palace and wrote a letter. Then he used his mana to send it to Nanhua sect. Nanhua sect, Huifeng Pavilion. Yuan Wang was training a phoenix when he suddenly saw a rainbow flying toward him. He reached out his hand to pick it up and casually read it. However, after reading it, he was shocked as if he could not believe it. After repeatedly confirming that the letter was real, he cast a few more spells, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was not the slightest response, and his heart sank. After a long time, he let go and watched the letter turn into dust in a daze. He let out a long sigh. A green-robed cultivator saw that something was wrong and asked carefully, "Master, what happened?" Yuan Yiming sighed and said, "Brother Yu fought with Master Zhang of Qinsong School and was carelessly defeated and killed." What? The green-robed cultivator's eyes widened as if he had misheard. Yuan Yiming stood up and said, "I need to report this to the sect master. Guard the cave well and do not let the phoenix run around. Wait for me to come back and recuperate. Before that, do not leak a single word of this." The cultivator hurriedly lowered his head and said, "Yes, disciple understands." Yuan Wang's body swayed and he turned into a wisp of clear air and left the cave. The green-robed cultivator turned around and put the phoenix back on the chain. He was about to return to the cave to cultivate, but he suddenly had a thought and thought to himself, Master Huang is dead, and I heard that senior martial brother Feng was captured by Wei Zihong of Qinsong School and taken to Yaoyin Pass. Does this mean that there is no one to protect Songding Heavenly Abode now? Thinking about this, he sneered and jumped out of the cave. With a whistle, a red-feathered eagle flew over. He stood firmly on it and flew toward the residence of the disciples of Songding Heavenly Abode. Huang Yu had always taken care of his disciples. Even if they did something wrong, he rarely punished them. However, this caused many disciples to act recklessly and unscrupulously. They often did things that offended their fellow disciples, and even the green-robed cultivator's family had suffered quite a bit. Now that he was dead and the disciple with the highest cultivation was not here, he had no more worries. Not long after, he arrived in front of a cave and shouted, "Fang Shinan, come out and greet your senior martial brother when you see him." Chapter 1066. Fang Xin had been cultivating in the cave for the past few days. He was waiting for Huang Yugong to come back before refining the medicine into a pill. After this period of meditation, he had some comprehension towards many of the profound theories that he originally thought he understood in his heart. However, when he was flipping through the Taoist book in the cave abode, he heard someone shouting outside. He couldn't help but feel a little strange. He thought to himself, judging from the voice, it's Yuan Chichio. Why did he come to my sect today? And you're so arrogant? Due to Yuan Chichio's limited aptitude, he could only be a caretaker in the bird villa. However, because he was a direct descendant of the Yuan clan, even though he had no talent, he was still brought along by Yuan Yiwen. He was a disciple in name, but in reality, he was an attendant. Fang Xin despised him for always asking for offerings from the junior disciples of the sect. Therefore, every time he followed Huang Yugong into the Phoenix Garden, he would mock and ridicule him. He was currently in the midst of punishment and his master was not in the sect. He was afraid of being caught, so even though he did not like this person, he pushed open the stone door and walked out. When he raised his head, he saw that he was standing on a huge eagle with his arms crossed, looking down at him from above. This person had come looking for him for no rhyme or reason today, and it caused him to faintly feel a strand of uneasiness. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, senior brother. May I know why senior brother has come looking for me? This little brother is following master's orders and is currently in seclusion. If it's not urgent, can we talk about it later?" Yuan Chichio laughed coldly to himself. Taoist Huang is already dead. What's the use of using him to pressure me? With the death of Huang Yugong, there was no one to take care of the Dingtsong cave sect. The key was that Fang Xin was not from a Xianmen family, so he had no family to support him. He wanted to reap the benefits, and now was the right time. Otherwise, when the news spread or when Feng Chengchang returned to the sect, it would be hard to say what would happen. He chuckled. "Junior brother Feng, I came here this time to discuss something with you." Fang Xin said, "Please enlighten me, Shi Xiang." Yuan Chichio stared at him with a burning gaze and said, "The 100 Phoenix gathering will be held in another 40 years. However, the Phoenix Garden is still lacking a few young phoenixes. I don't know when they'll come out. I'm afraid I won't be able to gather enough. I heard that Shitty has a blue phoenix egg and it will hatch in about 10 years. Can you give it to me first? In the future, when the old phoenix gives birth to a new child, I'll return it to Shitty." Fang Xin's expression turned cold. This blue phoenix egg was specially bestowed by Huang Yugong. In the future, it would be his guardian spirit bird. How could he be willing to lend it to someone else? Moreover, the other party's words sounded nice, but when the time came, he would definitely not be able to return. He snorted and said, "Senior martial brother Yuan, you must be joking. This phoenix egg was nurtured by my master for dozens of years with magic power and spirit herbs, and then he gave it to me. How can the ordinary phoenixes in your garden compare to it? Moreover, it's a gift from an elder, so I can't possibly use it as a favor." Yuan Chichio said leisurely, I'm afraid Shitty has misunderstood. I'm not here to discuss with you. This time, I'm here on the orders of my master to take this blue phoenix egg. Shitty has to give it to you, even if I don't want to. Spiritual Master Yuan? Fang Xin unclenched his fists and said, I don't believe it. Why would Spiritual Master Yuan give such an order? Yuan Chichio said with a faint smile, then you can go ask him. Although he was a fox borrowing the tiger's might, he wasn't afraid to ask for proof. Huang Yugong was dead, and Yuan Chi-Weng was probably discussing the sect's future plans with the sect master. How would he have the time to see a junior disciple? Fang Xinan said, all right, I'll go ask Spiritual Master Yuan now. Yuan Chichio sneered. You can go whenever you want, but don't delay my business. First, obediently hand over the blue phoenix egg. Don't force me to do it myself. Seeing Yuan Chichio's fearlessness, Fang Xin had a bad feeling. However, he didn't know what the problem was, so he couldn't help but feel a little anxious. He looked at Yuan Chichio and said, Senior Martial Brother, are you really going to do this? Even if I can't stop you today, when Master comes back, I'll have to go to you to seek justice. He could only use Huang Yugong's name now. However, this method that had never failed him in the past was useless today. Yuan Chichio said impatiently, so long-winded. He reached out his hand and a wisp of smoke flew out, wrapping around Fang Xinan. Then he threw him to the ground and shouted, Are you going to give it to me or not? Although Fang Xinan was protected by the mystic light, he was still injured. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his body trembled. He struggled to get up, wiped the corner of his mouth, and said with hatred, All right, I'll go get it for Senior Martial Brother. It's in my cave. Senior Martial Brother, do you want to come with me? Yuan Chichio was afraid that there was something in his cave that Huang Yugong had set up, so he said, Junior Martial Brother, you should have said so earlier. Don't play any tricks. Quickly go and get it for me. Fang Xin walked back to his cave. After a few turns, he came to a stone room. In the middle of the room, there was a huge egg that was 3 feet big on a jade plate. It was glowing with a blue light, and one could vaguely hear the sound of a beating heart. He was extremely unwilling to give up the egg. He thought to himself, since Yuan Chichio dares to do this to me, something must have happened in the sect that I don't know about. Even if the cave is sealed, it won't last long. Now that Master isn't here, and there's no one in the sect who can help me, I can only go out to avoid trouble. Although I've disobeyed Master's order, there's a reason for it. I hope Master can understand. I'll settle the score with this villain in the future. He was very clear that he had offended a lot of people. Once he gave up the blue phoenix egg, trouble would come one after another. The only way was to hide outside the mountain gate and come back after figuring out the situation. At that time, he would make the other party pay the price. He took out a medicine bottle and swallowed the pill. Then, he put all the magic treasures and external medicine into his sleeve. He then reached out his hand and carried the blue phoenix egg. This thing was extremely sensitive to spiritual vigor, and its outer shell was fragile. If he used Xian light to control it, it might be damaged. Therefore, he could only carry it with both hands. However, this phoenix egg was extremely heavy. Even when he was in good condition, he could barely carry it. It was fine at first, but when he walked out of the door and stepped down the stairs, his face twitched. It seemed to have affected his injury. He staggered and fell forward, and the blue phoenix egg also fell out. Yuan Chichio had long regarded this object as his own. He was startled and subconsciously wanted to use his evil chi to support it. But then he thought about it and realized that it was inappropriate to do so. He hurriedly jumped down from the eagle's back and flashed 100 feet away to support it. But at this moment, Fang Xin suddenly raised his head. He raised his hand and with a snap, he stuck a talisman on Yuan Chichio's body. Yuan Chichio's body stiffened, and he could not move at all. He said in shock and anger, "Body-securing talisman? Fang Xin, you dare to trick me?" Fang Xin took a few breaths. He sneered and said, "Only you are allowed to torture your fellow disciples, but I am not allowed to return the favor?" Yuan Chichio laughed angrily and said, "Good, good. Although your body-securing talisman is powerful, Your magic power is not enough. You can at most trap me for 100 breaths. When I come out, I will teach you a lesson. Fang Xin sneered and said, I am sorry. Senior Martial Brother Yuan, I am afraid you will not have such a chance. He kept the phoenix egg first, then raised his hand and released a Xian light to wrap up Yuan Qiqiu's body. As if he was venting his anger just now, he threw Yuan Qiqiu into his cave dwelling. Then he took out a spell. He said, Rise. With a loud bang, the cave door closed. The talisman flew up and sealed the place completely. He let out a long breath. The cardinal that controlled the formation was inside, but it would take at least half a day for Yuan Qiqiu to refine it. He would have run far away long ago. He threw the 10,000 beasts collar, and the dozen or so spiritual birds at the edge of the cliff were kept inside. Then he stood up and turned into a Xian light, rushing toward the mountain gate. At this moment, the people in the sect still did not know that Huang Yugong was dead. When the guards saw that it was Fang Xin, he pretended not to see him. He successfully rushed out of the gate, and after a while, the Xian light disappeared. Li Mountain Sect, Dipper Palace. Zhang Yan opened his eyes, and there seemed to be a flash of lightning in them. It was different from the battle with Yan Chongqing dozens of years ago. His battle with Huang Yugong had only lasted for a little more than 2 hours, and it did not consume much of his Fa Li. After a night of rest, his Fa Li had already gradually recovered. He flicked his finger, and a 9-feet-long feather floated out from his sleeve. The feather stem was unusually long, and the feathers were as fine as cotton. They were unusually soft, and the entire feather was snow-white. This item was left behind by Huang Yugong after his death. He did not know what kind of spiritual bird he took it from, and there was no mark of essence blood in it. However, he could feel a huge amount of essence stored in it, and it could be used to cast some kind of supernatural Taoist technique. However, before he could use it, he died. He thought about it and felt that he could keep it for now. If it was really a strange item, Nenhua sect would definitely come to him, and he would see how to deal with it. He put the item back into his bag, and he took out a jade plate that looked like a top. He held it in his hand and felt it, and he knew what it was for. He thought, no wonder Huang Yugong's magic power is so strong, it's all because of this talisman. He tossed the treasure to the ground, and with a flash of clear light, it turned into a short Daoren. He bowed and said, Spiritual Master Zhang, this lowly one greets you. Zhang Yan said, You're a talisman from Heaven Mending Pavilion? The short Daoren calmly admitted, Yes. Zhang Yan said, The magic power you borrowed from others cannot be obtained out of thin air, and you had to seize it from others. If it was a treasure from the Devil Sect, it would definitely absorb essence blood and divine energy. You're a profound gates talisman, so you most likely swallowed a jade pill. The short Daoren revealed an expression of admiration and said, That's right, spiritual master's discerning eyes aren't wrong. Soon after, his expression became bitter. It's just that spiritual master Huang owed me a debt, and before he could pay it back, he was killed by spiritual master. Sigh, this business didn't go through, and I've already lost my capital. Zhang Yan said, Then are you willing to work for my sect? The short Doran's expression was awkward, and he said, I am willing, but if I can't collect my debt, I can't sleep at night and I can't eat. This? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Then you're not willing. The short Daoren hurriedly said, Why don't spiritual master let me go first, and after I collect my debt, I'll work for spiritual master again? Zhang Yan's expression was calm, but a green light flew out from his back. The short Doran's expression changed, and he was about to fly out, but how could he escape in time? In an instant he was swept by that green light, and he was fixed in place. At the same time, he saw streaks of sword light float up, and their sharp edges were all pointed at him. Zhang Yan said faintly, Are you willing to pledge allegiance? He asked 3 times in a row, but the short Daoren didn't say anything for half a lifetime. It was obvious that he wasn't willing to truly pledge allegiance. Since that was the case, he wouldn't be lenient. If he let this kind of rare treasure go, even though it would make Yu Xiao and the other sects lose some pill jade, in the hands of a cultivator, it could greatly increase their battle prowess. Today, it was in the hands of Huang Yugong, and it was easy to deal with. If it fell into the hands of a cultivator with profound cultivation, it would be disadvantageous to Qinsong when the calamity arose in the future. He guided his spirit, and in the next moment, thousands of sword lights fell. Nanhua Sect, the main hall of the Mountain Gate, Heavenly Palm Palace. A heroic and imposing Taoist sat on the main seat. It was the sect master of Nanhua, Xiao Lingyun. After listening to Yuan Yiweng's report, he let out a long sigh and said, "It's a pity for Yugong. Spiritual Master Zhang is indeed the hall master of Qinsong School's Du Zhen. It seems that killing Yan Changxing wasn't a fluke." Yuan Yiweng said, "Sect Master, with Yugong's death, that heavenly cloud feather has fallen into Zhang Yan's hands. We should try to get it back." This feather was bestowed by the founder of Nanhua Sect. Cultivators could use their life essence as the price to transform their dharma into an ancient heavenly bird. There were 6 of these feathers. In Nanhua Sect, every cultivator who achieved heavenly abode would have one. It was a symbol of status and also used for protection. However, since the founding of the sect, no one had actually used it. Xiao Lingyun's expression was calm as he said, "Even if it fell into spiritual Master Zhang's hands, it's not a big deal. This item can't be used by cultivators of Nanhua Sect. The most important thing now is to stabilize the sect and prevent chaos." Yuan Yiweng said, "Sect Master is right." Xiao Lingyun said to the servant beside him, "Go and invite Spiritual Master X in here." The servant received the order and left. Not long after, a white-haired old man entered the hall. After greeting and sitting down, Yuan Yiweng told him about Huang Yugong's death. After listening, Spiritual Master Xen was silent for a long time before saying, "Originally, Huang Yugong was the youngest among the 3 of us. I didn't expect him to die before me." Xiao Lingyun said, "Half of Huang Yugong's death was man-made and the other half was fate. However, the calamity is approaching and our sect is short of a heavenly abode master. We need someone to take his place as soon as possible. Who do you think is suitable among the disciples?" Yuan Yiweng thought for a while and said, "Eldest disciple Huang Songxuan's cultivation has reached the required level. He has the potential to succeed." Spiritual Master Xin had no objections. Xiao Lingyun said, "Then announce my decree. Have him enter the spirit cave to cultivate tomorrow." At this time, Spiritual Master Xin said, "Sect Master Xin, after another 200 or 300 years, I will also be gone. Why don't we choose another person?" Huang Songquan was originally prepared to take his seat, but now that he has taken the empty spot after Huang Yugong's death, we must choose someone else. Yuan Yiweng said, "Huang Yugong's disciple Feng Qingchang is actually not bad. He is only a little bit weaker than Songquan. But this time, he was captured by Spiritual Master Zhang's disciple Wei Zihong. Even if Taoist sure ransomed him, it will be difficult to convince the masses." Although victory and defeat are common things, Feng Qingchang was defeated and imprisoned. With this stain on his record, it is impossible to let him have this opportunity again. Xiao Lingyun thought for a while and said, "This matter is too hasty to be decided today. We can discuss it later. That Spiritual Master Yuling's ascension gift cannot be missed from our Southern Flower Sect. Yuan Yiweng, I'll have to trouble you to make a trip and make contact with Spiritual Master Zhang. See if you can get the cloud feather back." Yuan Yiweng stood up and bowed. "I will solemnly obey Sect Master's decree." Chapter 1067. Yuan Yiweng left the sect and transformed into a green phoenix. He flew in the sky and arrived at Li Mountain Sect in a short while. After entering the sect, he first went to visit Zhenren Yuling and then to Spoon Fighting Palace. He wanted to ask for the cloud plume feather from Zhang Yan. However, he was told that Zhang Yan was recuperating after the battle and would not see any guests. He thought about it and found that it was true. Zhang Yan must have used up too much of his power in the battle with Huang Yugong and should be taking this chance to recover. Therefore, he did not think too much and went to visit Yuxiao School and the other Zenrens. Wu Yunyu and Zhou Ruing personally came out and welcomed him into the palace. They also called for Zhenren Shi and Bu Jingsu. Everyone sat down and Zhou Ruing said, "We feel sorry for Taoist Huang's death. However, the calamity is coming and your sect will have a chance to take revenge in the future." Yun Yiweng bowed and said, "I hope so." Although he agreed on the surface, he did not have any thoughts of revenge. He thought to himself, Huang Yugong's cultivation is similar to mine, but Zhang Yan was able to kill him. He is not someone I can fight. When the calamity comes, I will let Yu Xiao school worry about it. Our Southern Flower sect is not one of the 3 major sects. Why should we provoke such a fierce person? Wu Yunbi said, "Just now, I saw Taoist Zhang going to Spoon Fighting Palace. Did you want to ask Jinren Zhang for something?" Yuan Yiweng said, "That's right. Some treasures have fallen into Jinren Zhang's hands and I want to take them back." Jinren Shi said, "Before Taoist Huang fought, to prevent any unforeseen events, he specially passed all his belongings to me. Since Taoist Huang is here, let's return them to their rightful owners and see if they are here." As he said this, he took out a sleeve pouch. Yuan Yiweng was surprised. If the cloud plume feather was here, then he wouldn't have to discuss it with Zhang Yan. He thanked him and took it. However, when he looked around, he was a little disappointed. Aside from some normal magical items, there were some scattered pill jades, but the feather was nowhere to be found. However, when he thought about it again, it made sense. How important was that thing? It could even increase one's battle prowess, so why wouldn't he keep it on him? Noticing the unusual expression on Meng Qi's face, Spiritual Master Shi explained, "Fellow Taoist Huang originally had quite a lot of core jade. However, according to the agreement made before the battle, you will need to exchange quite a lot of core jade in exchange for the disciples of your sect. Therefore, I took it as a token of appreciation. I hope fellow Taoist will forgive me if I have overstepped my boundaries." Yuan Yiweng knew he had misunderstood and hurriedly said, "What are you talking about?" Brother Shi helped Yu Gong deal with the aftermath and also ransomed my disciple. Nanhua owes you a favor. Zhenren Shi shook his head and said, "This is really nothing." Yuan Yiweng looked at the crowd and said, "Since you are all watching from the side, I would like to ask a question. What did Master Zhang use to injure Yu Gong and cause his death?" However, after he asked this question, he was met with silence. Because no one saw what happened in the end, they couldn't answer. After a long time, Wu Yunbi said, "This is also something that I don't understand. At the time, the violet heavenly thundernet covered the inside and outside, so we couldn't see inside. However, it was impossible to kill Taoist Huang with just the thundernet. Once a cultivator entered the heavenly cave, they would obtain a breath of essence. As long as the essence didn't disperse, their life wouldn't die. In a battle, to exhaust this breath of essence, one would need to fight for at least a month. It wasn't something that could be done in a few hours. Unless one was struck multiple times by a killing true treasure, only then could one be killed." Zhou Ruing said hatefully, "Zhang Yan's disciple, Wei Zihong, inherited the teachings of Yaoying Grandmaster Yi Jiuyang and obtained a killing true treasure called the Sun-Embracing Axe. If Zhang Yan had this item, Taoist Huang wouldn't be his match." Bu Jingsu shook his head and said, "It's not the Sun-Embracing Axe." Wu Yunbi said, "Oh, what is Taoist Bu's opinion?" Bu Jingsu slowly said, "The Sun-Embracing Axe was refined by the Tai Heng Grand Ancestor before he started cultivating the profound path. The axe has an ominous aura, demonic blood, and qi. With Taoist Zhang's magical power, it would definitely be overflowing with murderous intent that pierced through the 9 heavens. We would also be able to sense it, so it definitely wouldn't be blocked by the thundernet." Bu Tian Pavilion was an expert in refining weapons, so everyone had to believe his words. Wu Yubi frowned. If he didn't understand Zhang Yan's methods, not only would he be in a passive position, but Huang Yugong would also have died unjustly. However, Zhang Yan also lost quite a bit of merit in this battle, so it could be considered as slightly delaying his second-degree attainment. However, he still had a doubt in his heart. It was obvious that Zhang Yan was an expert in the art of flying swords, so why did he use a sword talisman that was refined from precious materials in a battle? Wasn't this giving up the easy to find the difficult? It was true that in a battle of magical techniques in the heavenly cave, an image could travel thousands of miles, so ordinary profound weapons were indeed useless. However, flying swords could grow or shrink, and could change their size. Moreover, they could split into sword rays, so wouldn't it be better to use them against enemies? Could it be to conceal something? Just as he was pondering, a spiritual light suddenly flew into the main hall and floated motionlessly in the air. Zhou Ruiying was startled and hurriedly stood up. He respectfully received this spiritual light flying letter into his hand. Wu Yunbi also shivered. He didn't dare to sit and hurriedly stood up as well. Yuan Wen saw the two's appearance and knew that this was definitely a letter from their sect. Perhaps it was something important, so he stood up and said his goodbyes. After Shi and Bu said their goodbyes, they also returned to the palace to cultivate. After sending them off, Zhou Ruiying read the flying letter. His expression carried a hint of happiness as he said, "Senior Wu, the esteemed one has allowed me to use that plan." Wu Yunbi's expression changed. "But that borrowing..." At this point, he suddenly stopped and glanced outside. He transmitted his voice. "This is the boundary of Mount Li. Spiritual Master Yuling's cultivation is profound, but you must be careful. The walls have ears, so we can talk about it later." Zhou Ruiying also nodded and transmitted his voice. "After the ceremony of ascension, I will discuss it with Senior in detail." In the blink of an eye, another night passed. On the second day, early in the morning, within the mountain gate of Mount Li, a bell suddenly rang loudly. Flowers bloomed all over the mountain, and the fallen petals were profusion. The bells of the hundreds of monasteries all responded, and the sound traveled 1,000 miles. Spiritual Master Yuling walked out of the river calming palace. She wore a heavenly auspicious crown on her head and a robe of 100 phoenixes on the clouds. Fine pearls and necklaces swayed, and the sound of the bell spread throughout the entire palace and the mountains in the sky. Clear air rippled around her, and warm smoke enshrouded her. The clear light shone, and the celestial figure approached. The bright sun rose, and the clouds were indistinct. Behind her were several maids holding up a Qian Bao Ning canopy that could cover 100 people. The skirts of the maids below swayed in the wind. After Spiritual Master Yuling left the palace, she walked along the incomparably wide jade steps towards the highest peak, Morning Night Peak. And behind the canopy were the 11 disciples of the sect. The eldest disciple, Shen Zixin, walked at the very front. When Spiritual Master Yuling first built the sect, because it had yet to become a grotto heaven, many of the lower sects of West River were dissatisfied and came looking for her. After a fierce battle, these sects were all destroyed by her, but only a few of the direct disciples survived. After that, her cultivation improved, and no one dared to provoke her. However, in the past 1,000 years, Mount Li had experienced many battles, and the losses were not small. Until now, the disciples that were truly trained by her were only these 11. And in the next few hundred years, there would only be 2 who had the hope of becoming a grotto heaven. Even so, the spiritual masters present did not look down on her. Spiritual Master Yuling did not have the help of her peers. In the past 1,000 years, she had relied on her own strength to manage the sect to its current state. Spiritual Master Pang sighed, "It's not easy for Spiritual Master Yuling." Wu Wei chuckled and said, "After today, if Mount Li wants to continue its fate, it will depend on the abilities of Spiritual Master Yuling's disciples. If they can't, they will be like this mountain full of flowers. When they are in bloom, they will chase each other, and when they fail, they will wither into the mud under their feet." Zhang Yan said plainly, "Who knows what will happen after a few hundred years?" On the other side, Yu Shao and the other spiritual masters of the 4 sects were standing together. Bu Jingsu looked at Spiritual Master Yuling's figure and sighed softly. Wu Yunbi said, "Why is Taoist Bu sighing?" Bu Jingsu said, "Back then, Spiritual Master Yuling came to our sect and was willing to use the many treasures and materials left behind by West River to beg my teacher to refine a sect treasure. Teacher agreed, but because he was near the end of his life, he spent all his effort on this item. When he reincarnated, he only managed to refine the treasure fetus. Later, after sect leader's senior brother took over the sect, He was not willing to waste energy on this treasure, so he asked spiritual master Yuling to bring the treasure back to the sect to nurture. I thought that if this treasure could be refined, Mount Li's current situation would be much better. Wu Yunbi said in surprise, "Oh, there's such a thing? Why haven't we heard of it?" Bu Jingsu smiled bitterly. That treasure was not refined successfully and was returned in the end. How would my senior and junior brothers have the face to spread it around? Wu Yunbi thought to herself, from what Taoist Bu said, that treasure is not weak. Spiritual Master Yuling is very ambitious. Even if he took it back, he would not abandon it and would probably nurture it with all his heart. It would at least be refined for thousands of years. If one or two of Mount Li's disciples could inherit his mantle, or ask someone with great mana to help, he might be able to nurture it. It seems like Junior Sister Zhou's plan is feasible. As everyone was talking, Spiritual Master Yuling had already ascended morning-night peak. In front of all the spiritual masters and disciples, he passed the position of sect leader to his eldest disciple, Xin Zixin. After the greeting, the disciples stood where they were and watched as Spiritual Master Yuling walked along the cloud rope towards the void. Not long after, she arrived at the top of the clouds. Suddenly, the clouds parted and there was an altar 100 feet tall floating in the void. It looked down into the abyss and up into the sky. She hesitated for a moment and stepped onto the top of the altar. In the sky wind, her clothes fluttered and her ornaments clinked. Suddenly, at this moment, an immortal crane flew over, flapping its wings and circling around. The disciples of Mount Li all recognized it. This was their master's favorite white crane. Yuling Zhenren gently waved her hand. The white crane cried out in joy and landed, nestling in her bosom. It was extremely intimate. Spiritual Master Yuling caressed its feathers for a moment and pushed it away. He said gently, "Go. In the future, you will follow my eldest disciple, Zixin. She will take good care of you." The white crane chirped. It circled around her as if it was reluctant to part with her. Then, it spread its wings and flew into the sky. Spiritual Master Yuling looked into the distance and stood there for a moment. Suddenly, she heard celestial music. It seemed to linger beside her ears and also seemed to come from far away. Then, heaven and earth became bright and dark, as if day and night had alternated in an instant. Then, she heard a rumble. It was as if a crack had opened in the sky and a long rainbow was born. The light was hazy, illusory and real at the same time. Like a bridge, it extended to her feet but the other end was unknown. The eyes of the Zenrens focused on her and stared unblinkingly. But after a while, most of them were dazzled and did not dare to look again. Spiritual Master Yuling looked at the rainbow bridge for a moment and stepped onto it. Although she was clearly alone, with every step she took, there was another figure behind her. Some raised their cups to the moon, intoxicated. Some bent over to pick up flowers, smiling as they smelled the fragrance. Some read books at the table, dancing with their swords. Some dressed in front of a mirror, feeling sorry for themselves. Some stood on a high platform, looking down at the mountains. Some meditated and cultivated, unaware of the time, and so on and so forth. All kinds of expressions and appearances were different. At this moment, the people at the foot of the mountain heard a song coming from afar, as if it came from the horizon. The human world is full of tribulations, the heart is full of trials and tribulations. Plucking a gust of wind to give birth to wings, brushing away the mortal body and stepping into the gate of immortality. Hearing this, everyone unconsciously followed a few steps forward. Not long after, Spiritual Master Yuling had reached the end of the rainbow. But just as she was about to walk out, she turned her head back and took a look. In an instant, the figures that were left behind were like glass shattering, breaking one by one. Her gaze swept across the disciples once more. After this glance, she seemed to have no more reluctance to leave. She resolutely turned around and left. As she took the last step, her figure slowly faded from the world along with the rainbow bridge. In the end, not a single trace of her was left behind. At this moment, in the dojo of Mount Li, countless flower petals danced and floated around the mountain. The bell rang softly, sounding both joyful and sorrowful. "Teacher!" Seeing that she had finally disappeared, the thousands of female disciples at the foot of the mountain all knelt down and wiped away their tears. All of them wept and were extremely sad. Shen Zixin's face was full of tears as she knelt down and kowtowed 3 times respectfully, saying, "Teacher, have a safe journey. Disciple will not send you off." The Zenrens at the scene were also deeply shaken. Ascending to another world, shedding mortal and entering the real world was something that they all yearned for. Stepping through this door, it was as the song said, ascending to the gate of immortality. Spiritual Master Wu suddenly said faintly, "Old days pavilion, old days wind." Wu Yunbi also felt the same. He thought for a moment and said, "The past is in the past." Bu Jingsu sighed, "It is hard to know if the heart of Tao is sincere." Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back and his gaze followed the direction where Spiritual Master Yuling disappeared. He said in a clear voice, "The spirit goes free and eternal." Everyone stood there and did not move for a long time, as if each of them was comprehending in their hearts. At this moment, Zhou Ruing took a few steps back. She swept her gaze across the crowd and found a girl with gentle features among the disciples of Mount Li. She transmitted a few words over, and the girl's body trembled slightly as she looked towards her. Zhou Ruing nodded at her and with a shake of her body, she created a shadow clone with a blurry face and headed towards Vermilion Moon Palace. Not long after she entered the hall, she saw the girl also walk in. She came forward and bowed, saying, "Ming Huaping pays her respects to Spiritual Master Zhou." Zhou Ruing said, "Martial niece Huaping, you may dispense with the formalities." Ming Huaping said in a low voice, "Spiritual Master summoned this junior for something?" Zhou Ruing tried to make her voice as gentle as possible and said, "Don't be so restrained. Since you have become Tao companions with that nephew of mine, you can be considered one of us." Ming Huaping lowered her head and did not speak. Zhou Ruing smiled and said, "Today, I called you here to ask you, are you willing to come to my Yuxiao to cultivate?" Ming Huaping raised her head in shock, her eyes filled with doubt and puzzlement. Zhou Ruing looked at her and said, "I know that only sect Master Shinzixin can use the spirit cave of your Mount Li sect for now. How can your cultivation compare to hers? In my Yuxiao school, there is a paradise. If you are willing, I can bring you back to the sect." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.